Chapter 504. Afraid of being cut. The Emperor Dog was also very afraid of that sword. In any case, it didn't dare to block the enraged Xiaoling. This little guy had a very bad temper. When it was angry, no one could stop it except Yi Xian. In the distance, the God King's throne was clearly also afraid of the sword in Xiaoling's hand. It immediately turned and ran, but it couldn't run out of the secret room. So, inside the secret room, Xiaoling chased after the God King's throne with the sword. And the Emperor Dog hurriedly left the secret room. Seeing this, Lian Wan also hurriedly left the secret room. Outside the secret room, Lian Wan looked at the Emperor Dog. "You're not going to stop it?" The Emperor Dog said indifferently, "They're all big shots, we can't afford to offend them." Lian Wan the Emperor Dog walked to the side, lay on the ground and began to recover its body. It hadn't completely absorbed the holy water from the holy spring. Lian Wan looked at the Emperor Dog. "Aren't you worried?" The Emperor Dog said indifferently, "What's there to worry about? That kid's life is very tough." It knew that Yi Xian had that tower on him, so he usually wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Especially since the tower was in Yi Xian's body. If the God King's throne wanted to kill Yi Xian, the God King's throne would definitely be out of luck. No, the God King's throne was already out of luck. The God King's throne was a Dao realm treasure, but it knew that it definitely couldn't withstand that sword. The Emperor Dog stopped thinking about Yi Xian and the God King's throne, and began to focus on recovering its body. Lian Wan looked into the secret room. The enraged Xiaoling was still chasing after the God King's throne, and where was Yi Xian now? When Yi Xian sat on the God King's throne, he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already on a battlefield. A battlefield? Yi Xian looked around. There were corpses everywhere, and the surroundings were filled with the pungent smell of blood. What was this place? Yi Xian frowned. He walked forward and there was the sound of water under his feet. No, it was all blood. Illusion? Yi Xian's sword will spread out in all directions. But soon Yi Xian's frown deepened. Because he realized that his surroundings didn't seem to be an illusion, but reality. Yi Xian looked around. Gusts of wind were blowing and it was very eerie. Test? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian continued walking forward. Not long after, he suddenly stopped because he discovered that the corpse on the ground was wriggling. Suddenly, a corpse in front of him stood up, and then it pounced towards him. However, this corpse hadn't even approached him when it was slashed into pieces by a strand of light. But in the next moment, another corpse stood up and charged towards him. Not only that, but all the corpses on the ground slowly stood up. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian frowned slightly. What the hell is going on? At this time, the surrounding corpses were already rushing towards him. Yi Xian pressed his fingers together and pointed lightly, and a flying sword flew out. In an instant, the corpses around him were slashed into two at the waist. But in the next moment, more and more corpses charged towards him. More and more corpses appeared, and there were so many that his flying sword wasn't able to kill them all. Yi Xian opened his palm, and a sword appeared in his hand. The next moment, he dashed forward and slashed out a beam of sword light. In an instant, hundreds of corpses in front of him were directly cut into pieces by this beam of sword light. Yi Xian charged forward with his sword in hand because he saw white light at the end of the road. All along the way, Yi Xian could be said to be unstoppable. But it wasn't long before he was stopped. Because the number of corpses was increasing. Up until now, there were at least 1,000,000 corpses blocking his path. I can't kill them all. Yi Xian's expression was slightly unsightly because he noticed that the number of corpses was increasing, and it was to the point that his hands were tired from killing them. What kind of test is this? Yi Xian didn't have time to think too much about it. All he could do now was kill madly. Just like that, after 2 hours, Yi Xian realized that he was slightly exhausted. However, if he relaxed even a little, the corpses would pounce on him. Right at this moment, Soul's voice suddenly resounded. "Young lord, this is a test for you." Yi Xian slashed out with his sword, and the corpses in front of him were instantly pulverized. At the same time, 2 flying swords flew around him incessantly. Yi Xian wiped his face and said, "Test me for what?" Soul said, "If I'm not wrong, this should be the famous trial of the god race, the Azura trial." The Azura trial? Yi Xian frowned slightly. "I've never heard of it." Soul explained, "This is the most difficult trial of the god race. In the god race, only the imperial family is qualified to take this trial. If young lord successfully passes this trial, not only will you obtain the Divine King throne and the Divine King sword, but you will also obtain the power of Azura." Yi Xian rushed forward, and everywhere he passed, countless corpses were pulverized. Then he waved his sword and said, the power of Azura? Soul said, the power of Azura is a very strong power, several times stronger than your power of Emoku. After a moment Yi Xian asked, how do I pass this trial? Soul said in a low voice, I don't know. Yi Xian, Soul said again, I only know that there is a saying in the god race, how can one obtain the power of Azura without experiencing Azura Hell? Azura Hell? Yi Xian looked into the distance. In front of him was still a sea of corpses. There were so many of them that they seemed endless. Can't kill them all. That was what Yi Xian was thinking at this moment. Why kill them all? This thought suddenly flew into Yi Xian's mind. The next moment Yi Xian gently stamped his right foot and his whole body soared into the sky. At the same time, a flying sword appeared under his feet. Then, his whole body turned into a sword light and disappeared not far away. Below, countless corpses looked up at Yi Xian. In the air Yi Xian laughed loudly. Just like that Yi Xian flew through the air on his sword. When he looked down he still felt some lingering fear. There were at least millions of corpses on the ground below. If he relied on killing alone, he estimated that he would not be able to kill them all in a year. After a while Yi Xian saw a huge statue, and around the statue the corpses were far away, not daring to approach. Yi Xian stopped and landed in front of the statue. The statue had the appearance of a middle-aged man, wearing a loose golden robe, with a sword hanging from his waist. The God King's sword. Right at this moment the statue suddenly opened its eyes. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. This fellow is alive? The statue looked down at Yi Xian with an indifferent gaze. You don't have the bloodline of my god race, so why are you able to come here? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, I went the wrong way. Why don't you send me back? The statue flared up with rage. How presumptuous. This is a sacred place. How dare you disrespect it? As it spoke, a powerful pressure suddenly crushed down from within its body. Right at this moment Yi Xian suddenly appeared behind the statue, and two sword lights flickered behind him. The statue had been slashed by the sword lights, but it was completely unharmed. Yi Xian immediately rode his sword and fled very quickly. But suddenly the space in front of him warped. In the next moment he appeared in front of the statue once more. The statue looked down at him with an indifferent gaze. Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. Senior, we can talk. The statue looked down at Yi Xian. Who exactly are you? Yi Xian thought for a moment and was about to speak when the statue suddenly shouted angrily, Come out! As soon as the voice fell, the soul-suppressing sword was forcefully brought out. The mysterious power was forcefully brought out. When he saw the soul-suppressing sword, Yi Xian cursed inwardly. He didn't forget that the god race and the soul race were sworn enemies in the past. Soul-suppressing sword. The statue frowned slightly. After a moment it looked at Yi Xian. You're from the nether race. Yi Xian shook his head. I'm a human. The statue asked, Then why do you have the nether race's soul-suppressing sword? Yi Xian said, My sister gave it to me. Who is your sister? Jian Zizai. Jian Zizai? Yi Xian nodded. The statue asked, Who is Jian Zizai? At this point its expression suddenly changed. It's her. Yi Xian's heart relaxed. So this guy knew Jian Zizai. After a moment of silence the statue asked again, Where is she now? Yi Xian said, She went somewhere else. The statue was silent. After a moment, the statue's expression gradually became a little complicated. She is the most outstanding person in the history of my god race. As it said that, it looked at Yi Xian. Human, you are also very outstanding. Unfortunately, you are not from my god race. Yi Xian said, Do you know that the god race has declined? The statue nodded, its expression becoming more and more complicated. Yi Xian looked at the statue. You also think I am outstanding, so why don't you invest in me? Maybe I can bring the god race back to glory? The statue looked at Yi Xian. Are all humans as thick-skinned as you? Yi Xian was silent. Thick-skinned? In this world the most useless thing was thick-skinned. What was the use of it? A shameless person was invincible. The statue was also silent, as if thinking about something. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, although I am not from the god race but... At this moment the statue suddenly said, You can become the god of my god race. Yi Xian was stunned. The statue looked down at Yi Xian. Although you have a human body, you can become the god of my god race. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What does senior mean? The statue said, Blood exchange. I can give you the blood of my original body. At that time, my blood will transform your body and make you a true god of my god race. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Senior, don't joke around. He didn't want to become a god. He just wanted to be himself. The statue said coldly, "What? You don't want to be the god of my god race?" Yi Xian nodded. "Senior, I just want to be myself." After saying that, he turned and left. However, he had only taken a few steps when a powerful force directly enveloped him. Yi Xian's face changed. "Senior, you won't use force, will you?" The statue looked down at him. "I can't wait any longer. And you, if you become the god of my god race may have a hope of revival. So, it's not up to you." As the voice fell, Yi Xian's body suddenly trembled violently. At the same time, a corpse appeared in front of him. This corpse looked exactly the same as the statue behind him. Yi Xian urged the flying sword, but he found that the flying sword disappeared as soon as it appeared. Yi Xian's face changed. Little soul. Little soul said with some grievance. "Young lord, I'm also locked. I can't move." Yi Xian was about to speak. At this moment, from the corpse in front of him, a stream of blood suddenly flew out and entered his body. Yi Xian's eyes instantly widened. He felt his body burning. However, at this moment, a horrified voice suddenly sounded behind him. "How is this possible? Your blood is actually devouring this king's divine blood. How is this possible?" "No. Impossible, no." Chapter 505. At this moment, Yi Xian's entire body was burning like fire, and inside his body the divine king's blood was being devoured. Behind Yi Xian, the divine king's face was full of disbelief. This continued for about an hour before Yi Xian felt a little better. At this time he felt a great power hidden in his body. As if thinking of something, he suddenly turned to look at the divine king. "My blood has been swapped?" The divine king looked at him without saying anything. At this time, Soul's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. "Young lord, his blood has been swallowed by you." "Swallowed?" Yi Xian was stunned, then asked, "What do you mean?" Soul said, "After his blood entered your body, young lord, it couldn't beat your blood, so it was swallowed by your blood." "Yi Xian," Soul said again, "your blood hasn't been swapped. On the contrary, your blood has swallowed his blood and your body is changing." Yi Xian hurriedly looked at his body and sure enough, his body was now wriggling. Yi Xian looked at the divine king who had now calmed down. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, the divine king suddenly said, "Did any of your ancestors have any strong masters?" "Ancestors?" Yi Xian thought about it, then shook his head. "I don't know." He really didn't know if there were any strong masters in the Yi family's ancestors. He knew very little about the Yi family's history. The divine king looked at Yi Xian with a rather complicated expression. "The power of your bloodline is very strong, but this bloodline is hidden, and you haven't activated it." Soul also said, "Young lord, this divine king's blood is very powerful, and your blood can swallow his blood, so it's really, really powerful. Young lord, either your father is very powerful or your ancestors were very powerful." Bloodline. Yi Xian was silent. Only his mother, Dugu Xian, knew about bloodlines. It seemed like he would have to ask her when he had the time. At this time, the God King suddenly said, "You have already absorbed my blood, and now my blood is transforming your body. Sit down, I will teach you the divine blood technique." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, the blood has modified my body." The divine king said, "Don't worry, you're still you. My blood can't suppress your original blood, so I've already become your nourishment." Yi Xian was speechless. The divine king continued, "Sit down cross-legged, I will teach you how to absorb this blood, and also teach you the divine blood art." Yi Xian nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. At this time, the God King's voice resounded in his mind, "Blood is the root of man. Its potential is boundless. If you can unleash its potential, your power will be limitless." Yi Xian asked, "Blood?" The divine king said, "This divine blood art is a forbidden art of my god race. Ordinary people are unable to control it." Yi Xian asked, "Can I control it?" The divine king said, "Yes. This divine blood art is incomparably powerful, but it has a fatal flaw, and that is the power of bloodline. If the opponent's bloodline is stronger than yours, you will undoubtedly be seeking death by using this art. Therefore, if you want to learn this art, your bloodline must be strong enough, and your bloodline power is very strong. Very strong." When the divine king said this, his expression was solemn. He knew very well what level his bloodline power had reached. His blood was a pure divine emperor bloodline, but it was suppressed by Yi Xian's blood, and even devoured, completely defeated. His divine emperor bloodline was completely defeated. This was also why he was not angry and instead wanted to rope in Yi Xian. A person with such a bloodline must have an extraordinary background. For the god race it was better to have a friend than an enemy. 2 hours later Yi Xian's expression gradually became solemn. Because he discovered that this divine blood art was truly terrifying. Blood control. This divine blood art could control blood, and it could also devour blood to continuously nourish the body. In other words, as long as he had enough blood, his power was endless. It could be said that as long as he kept killing, he could obtain endless power. Azura power? Yi Xian hurriedly asked. Senior, this divine blood art refers to Azura power? The God King nodded. In the past, the outsiders did indeed call this the power of Azura. As long as you continue to kill, you will be able to obtain an endless supply of blood. In this situation, in theory, you will never fall. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have enough blood. Saying this, he paused slightly and then said, however, you must remember that this art has a flaw. After absorbing blood power to a certain extent, you will enter a bloodthirsty state. Yi Xian was somewhat puzzled. Bloodthirsty state? The Divine King explained, in the bloodthirsty state your blood will boil and your power will increase by at least 10 times. However, in this situation if you are not careful your body will not be able to withstand the power of your blood, and your body will directly collapse. Moreover, your mind may be corroded by the killing. Yi Xian's expression was somewhat ugly. This thing had a huge side effect. The Divine King suddenly said, if you don't want to learn, it's fine. Yi Xian fell silent. Blood control. Thinking of this, a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. The next moment, the corner of his mouth slightly rose. Learn? Why wouldn't I learn? Senior, please teach me well. The Divine King glanced at Yi Xian and nodded slightly. Calm your chi and focus. Just like this, Yi Xian slowly entered an ethereal state. In the secret room, Xiaoling did not chase after the Divine King's throne. Because she was tired. Xiaoling hugged her sword and sat in a corner, panting, but she still stared at the Divine King's throne in the distance. The Divine King's throne was also in a corner, extremely vigilant. It was a Dao realm divine weapon, but its instincts told it that the sword was very dangerous. If it was slashed by the sword, it would definitely be very, very tragic. At this moment Xiaoling took out a pile of spirit fruits and started to eat. After a while she felt that she had strength again. Thus, she hugged the sword and rushed towards the Divine King's throne, outside the secret room. Lian Wan'er looked at the Divine King's throne in the secret room, thinking about something. At this moment, a group of people suddenly walked over. Lian Wan'er turned around, and when she saw the people who came, she suddenly frowned. The leader was an old man wearing a loose robe. His eyes were cold, and he did not come with good intentions. The old man walked in front of Lian Wan'er, and Lian Wan'er bowed slightly, saying softly, Teacher Mo. Teacher Mo, the God race's technique imparting elder, had a very high status in the God race. Teacher Mo looked coldly at Lian Wan'er. I heard that you let a human into the secret room. Lian Wan'er nodded, yes. Teacher Mo's eyes became colder. You want to give the Divine King's throne to a human? Lian Wan'er was about to speak, but Teacher Mo suddenly said angrily, are you crazy? The Divine King's throne is our God race's treasure, and you actually gave it to an outsider, you. As he spoke, he directly led the group into the secret room. Inside the secret room, Xiaoling, who was chasing after the Divine King's throne, stopped. She glanced at the old man and the others, feeling a little weak. She was a little afraid of humans. Because back in the firmament world, she had been bullied by humans to no end. But she did not know that she was actually very good at fighting. Xiaoling blinked, then hugged her sword and retreated to a corner. Teacher Mo glanced at Xiaoling, frowning slightly. Who are you? Xiaoling took out a spirit fruit and ate it. She looked calm on the surface, but inside she was panicking. Seeing that Xiaoling did not speak, Teacher Mo waved his right hand. Take her down first. As he spoke, the two guards behind him directly rushed towards Xiaoling. Seeing this, Xiaoling's expression changed. In the next moment she closed her eyes, hugged her sword, and slashed wildly. After a breath, the place suddenly quietened down. Everyone was looking in front of Xiaoling. In front of Xiaoling, the two guards had already been turned into pieces. Teacher Mo looked at Xiaoling in shock. You? Xiaoling sneaked a glance, and when she saw the pieces of the corpses she was stunned. Are they dead? Everyone. Xiaoling looked at the sword in her hand, then at Teacher Mo and the others, a little confused. I killed them? Everyone. At this moment Xiaoling said softly, are humans so weak? Not far away, Lian Wan'er and the others' mouths twitched. Xiaoling seemed to have thought it through. She hugged her sword and pointed at Teacher Mo. Are you going to bully me? Teacher Mo narrowed his eyes, and in the next moment he suddenly disappeared. Xiao Ling'er's expression changed and she closed her eyes and slashed forward with force. Rumble. With this slash, the surrounding space suddenly collapsed, and the entire secret room instantly turned into nothingness. At the same time, Teacher Mo, who was in front of Xiao Ling'er, was sent flying. This time he was sent flying for a full 300 meters. Everyone present was dumbfounded. Xiao Ling'er was also stunned, but soon she jumped in joy. So humans are so weak. Not far away, the Emperor Dog glanced at Xiao Ling'er and shook its head. In fact, Xiao Ling'er was also very strong, but she just did not know that she was strong. Especially now, Xiao Ling'er and that sword could be said to be a bit heaven-defying. Because the increase in battle strength brought by that sword was too terrifying. Unfortunately, Yi Xian couldn't use it, or it would be even more heaven-defying. It didn't understand why Xiao Ling'er could use it, but Yi Xian couldn't. Fear had already appeared in the eyes of the God Race's experts. Fear. They really were quite afraid. Suddenly, all of them turned around to look at Teacher Mo. They watched as Teacher Mo's body started to crumble inch by inch, and it didn't take long for only his soul to remain. Moreover, his soul was extremely ethereal, and it seemed like it would vanish at any moment. Teacher Mo gazed at Xiao Ling'er, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Yo. Xiao Ling'er was about to speak, but her eyes suddenly lit up. After that, she turned around and took out a small box. She opened the box and muttered something. The Emperor Dog was quite curious and it listened attentively. Oh, all right. Tonghulu is delicious. The 7th floor? Is it a treasure? I can't go in. Do you want to play with me? Is he killing someone? Who is he? The Emperor Dog was speechless. P.S. I'm sorry. I went on a date with a few girls yesterday, so I woke up late today. Please forgive me. Chapter 506. Just like that, Xiao Ling'er muttered for around an hour before she stopped. The Emperor Hound didn't understand either. None of the God Race experts dared to move. Especially after they saw Xiao Ling'er destroy Mo Shi's body with a single slash, all of them felt fear towards this little girl. Fear. They were truly afraid of Xiao Ling. At this moment, Xiao Ling'er suddenly put the box away and turned to look at the Divine King's throne. The Divine King's throne took a few steps back. Clearly it was slightly fearful. Xiao Ling'er was clearly very happy. Her face was filled with a radiant smile. She didn't attack. Instead, she hugged her sword, turned around, and vanished. At this moment, she'd forgotten about Yi Xian. Everyone heaved sighs of relief when they saw Yi Xian vanish. The Emperor Hound heaved a sigh of relief as well. It was quite troubled by this sword-hugging Xiao Ling'er. At this moment, it seemed to have thought of something and suddenly looked at the Divine King's throne. Lian also looked at the Divine King's throne. The secret room had been destroyed by Xiao Ling'er's sword. In other words, the seal had been removed, but the Divine King's throne was still there. The Divine King's throne didn't run? The Emperor Hound and Lian glanced at each other. They didn't understand why the Divine King's throne didn't run. At this moment, Mo Shi suddenly floated over. Lian looked at Mo Shi, who said solemnly, "Who is she?" Although his body had been destroyed, he'd calmed down. A little girl holding a sword cut him down. Was that normal? Of course it wasn't. He wasn't stupid. He knew that the human and the little girl were definitely not ordinary people. It wasn't wise to continue fighting at a time like this. After all, the God Race wasn't the God Race of the past. Most of the time they had to keep a low profile. Lian glanced at Mo Shi but didn't say anything. Actually, this time she also hoped that the Divine Race could make a good change. To change the God Race they had to be ruthless. Otherwise the God Race could only struggle at death's door. In front of the statue, a blood-red aura had appeared around Yi Xian. At this moment, the aura he emitted was even more evil than the power of Moke. The divine blood art was actually a kind of demonic attack. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. In his eyes, the eye of Maku had turned red. Yi Xian stood up. As he stood up, the aura around him flowed like blood. At this time, the God King softly said, "Your divine blood art has been successfully cultivated. You now have absolute control over your blood. You can use it or absorb it, but remember, don't easily enter the bloodthirsty state because your body isn't very strong. Once you enter the bloodlust state, it will be very difficult for your body to withstand the power of that blood." Yi Xian bowed slightly to the God King. "Thank you, Senior." The God King said, "There's no need to thank me. I also have my own selfish motives. You now have the blood of the God race in your body. I hope you can lead the God race to continue on." At this point he paused and then said, "If possible, Let her return to the god race one day. Yi Xian nodded. I will do my best. The God King nodded slightly. He spread his right hand. Suddenly, a golden light came from the sky. The next moment, a golden sword with a sheath appeared in his hand. The God King's sword. The God King looked at Yi Xian. You should already know the secret of the soul-suppressing sword. Then do you know the secret of the God King's sword? Yi Xian hurriedly said, Please enlighten me, senior. The Divine King looked at the Divine Emperor's sword in his hand. This sword was forged by the first Divine Emperor of the God race. Its blade was forged from blue crystal star metal and the bone of a golden divine dragon. Its hilt was forged from the stars, the sun, and the moon, and its scabbard was forged from the blood of a golden divine dragon. At this point, his right hand lightly flicked the Divine Emperor's sword. A sword hum suddenly soared into the sky. In the next moment, under Yi Xian's gaze, the sword turned into a sword light and flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, a golden dragon thousands of meters long appeared in the sky. The golden dragon looked down disdainfully at everything. Yi Xian, the God King said softly, its soul is condensed from the dragon soul of the golden dragon, and this golden dragon was once the first divine beast guardian of the god race. At this point he looked at Yi Xian. Now you are its master. Yi Xian said solemnly, Senior, will it not obey me? The God King shook his head. No, its responsibility is to protect the god race, and you shoulder the revival of the god race. Therefore it will only help you. With its help, if you encounter monsters in the future, it can directly suppress the opponent's bloodline. If you encounter a dragon, as long as the opponent hasn't reached the level of the golden dragon, it can directly crush the opponent's bloodline. It naturally restrains the dragon race whose bloodline is lower than its. When he spoke up to here, he seemed to have thought of something and said seriously, The world is vast and boundless. Even the divine gold dragon clan isn't considered to be at the top of the pyramid. Of course, in my knowledge, there are only a few demon beasts that can surpass them in terms of bloodline, and those demon beasts belonged to legends all those years ago. Even I have never seen one. In this era, it can't be said that there are no monsters that can suppress the golden dragon in terms of bloodline, but there are definitely very, very few. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. As he spoke, he waved his right hand. In the sky, the golden dragon swooped down, its powerful dragon might seemingly about to crush the earth. Powerful. This was Yi Xian's first impression. The dragon might of this golden dragon was much, much stronger than his sword force. Yi Xian looked up at the golden dragon expressionlessly and did not dodge. As for the dragon might, even though he felt like he couldn't breathe, he still forcefully endured it. At this moment, the golden divine dragon arrived above Yi Xian's head. When it arrived above Yi Xian's head, it had already transformed into a sword and landed steadily in front of Yi Xian. The Divine King's sword. Yi Xian stretched out his hand to grasp the sword. With this grasp, a golden dragon flashed from the scabbard. At the same time, a sword howl and dragon roar shook the sky. Domineering. That was how Yi Xian felt when he held the sword. At this moment he felt like he was the overlord of the world. Those who submit to me live, and those who oppose me die. That was how he felt right now. What a great sword. Yi Xian couldn't help but reveal a brilliant smile on his face. Meanwhile, the Divine King said, Do you know what's truly powerful about this sword? Yi Xian looked at the Divine King and the latter said softly, The soul of the golden dragon. The strength of the golden dragon. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. The Divine King smiled. Soul imprint. As soon as the Divine King finished speaking, the golden dragon suddenly entered the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. In an instant, a powerful aura erupted from Yi Xian's body. At this moment, his body contained the soul of a dragon. Yi Xian suddenly let out a furious roar, and a golden dragon silently appeared behind him. The Divine King said in front of Yi Xian, Now that your soul has fused with the dragon soul, your soul is at least 10 times stronger than before. It can be said that you're basically immune to soul type and spiritual energy techniques. Besides that, with the dragon soul's blessing, your techniques and sword techniques will become several times stronger. You can feel it now. Yi Xian closed his eyes slowly. At this moment, he felt that his divine consciousness could sense everything within a radius of 500 miles. He could even sense an ant on the ground clearly. As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian issued a command in his heart. In an instant, a long tree that was 500 kilometers away was pierced by a ray of light. 500 kilometers in an instant. At this moment Yi Xian was slightly shocked. With this dragon soul, he could truly take the head of an enemy that was 500 kilometers away in an instant. This dragon soul's blessing was too terrifying. Especially with the soul-suppressing sword, he was completely confident that he could instantly kill a manifestation realm powerhouse. Of course, he still wasn't confident against powerhouses like Master Painter and Endless Heaven. However, he was confident that he could fight them now. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed. Soon, the dragon soul in his body returned to the sword. As soon as the dragon soul disappeared, he felt like he was collapsing, and he almost collapsed. Yi Xian looked at the Divine King. The Divine King said, "The dragon soul is much stronger than your soul. Your soul and body won't be able to withstand it for too long. 15 minutes at most. In this 15 minutes, you can use this dragon soul and dragon power to instantly kill everything in the world. Of course, don't encounter any particularly powerful enemies." Dragon power? Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Is this the power of a dragon?" The Divine King nodded. This sword also contains the power of the golden divine dragon. This power was used to stabilize the sword's blade and hilt. You can use this power as well. This power isn't any weaker than the power of Azura. Of course, your body still won't be able to withstand it for too long. Body? Yi Xian said solemnly, "How should I improve my body?" The Divine King was silent for a moment and then he said, "If you want to improve your body, you have to go to a place." Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Where?" The Divine King said softly, "The Ancient Devil Clan." Yi Xian's brows furrowed slightly. The Ancient Devil Clan? The Divine King nodded slightly. In the past, the Ancient Devil Clan was a clan that was only inferior to the Divine Clan and the Nether Clan. Their strongest point was their body. Their body cultivation method was quite unique. Yi Xian asked softly, "Do I have to go to the Ancient Devil Clan?" The God King nodded. The Ancient Demon Clan should have declined by now. I just don't know if they've been exterminated. If they haven't, you can try your luck. As for whether or not you can obtain their fleshly body cultivation inheritance, that will depend on your luck. Yi Xian nodded and said softly, "I have to try." The Divine King said, "You can go now. Remember, don't forget what you promised me." Yi Xian earnestly said, "I will do my best." Since he was entrusted with a task, he had to complete it. Since he, Yi Xian, had received benefits from others, he naturally had to do his best to fulfill his promise. The Divine King nodded. "Go." Yi Xian cupped his fists. "Senior, farewell." Saying so, he turned to leave. But not long after, he suddenly turned back to the Divine King. "But, Senior, how do I go out?" The Divine King waved his right hand and in an instant Yi Xian disappeared. As soon as Yi Xian disappeared, the Divine King seemed to think of something and frowned. Then the Divine King's Throne. Chapter 507. Divine King's Throne. Yi Xian only thought of it after coming out. Divine King's Throne's grade was above Soul-Suppressing Sword and Divine Emperor Sword. What kind of heaven-defying effect did this throne have? Yi Xian was looking forward to it. Seeing Yi Xian come out, Lian Wan'er quickly walked up to him. "You passed the trial?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." Lian Wan'er was stunned, then her expression became complicated. "Passed. A human passed the most difficult trial of the Protoss race." Yi Xian looked around. "What happened?" Lian Wan'er shook her head. "That little girl did it." "Little girl?" Yi Xian was startled, then he quickly understood who Lian Wan'er was talking about. "Shaolin? Why did she come out?" At this moment, Emperor Hound said, "She came to find you. She chased that chair for 4 hours with that sword." Saying this, it looked at Yi Xian. "She seems to know she's good at fighting, you better be careful." Yi Xian. At this moment, Emosher suddenly said, "I don't believe you passed the trial of our Protoss race." Yi Xian looked at Emosher. "You are?" Lian Wan'er said, "Our Protoss race's imparting elder." Yi Xian nodded, then looked at Emosher. "Do you need me to prove it to you?" Emosher looked at Yi Xian. "Prove it to the old man." Yi Xian smiled. "All right." Saying this, he opened his palm. The Divine Emperor Sword appeared in it. Seeing the Divine Emperor Sword, all the Protoss powerhouses' expressions changed. Emosher looked at the Divine Emperor Sword in disbelief. "No. How is this possible? Why would the Divine Emperor give his inheritance to an outsider?" Yi Xian's smile gradually turned cold. Emosher was shocked when he witnessed this scene, and he hurriedly said, "The old man doesn't have any other intentions. He's just curious." Yi Xian turned around and looked at Lian Wan'er. "Summon all the God Clan people here, especially the young generation of the God Clan. All of them must be present." Lian Wan'er hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned to leave. Yi Xian looked at the God King's throne on the right. The God King's throne did not flee. He walked up to it and said softly, "If you don't want to follow me, you can leave." He naturally wanted to obtain this divine king's throne. After all, it was a Tao realm-level divine artifact. However, he knew that he couldn't force his way through an existence of this level. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know how he died from the backlash. The divine king's throne did not respond. Yi Xian smiled and said, "If you don't say anything, I'll take it as you agreeing to follow me." With that, he directly stowed the God King's throne into the World Prison Pagoda. Within the World Prison Pagoda, Xiao Linger, who was holding the box and muttering to herself, had suddenly turned around, and her expression changed when she saw the World Prison Pagoda. A moment later, she immediately ran out, but it didn't take long for her to return. But this time there was a sword in her hand. The God King's throne was speechless. Outside the World Prison Pagoda, it didn't take long for Lian Wan to arrive before Yi Xian with a group of people. There were around 10,000 of them, and there were young and old amongst them. All the members of the God clan were looking at Yi Xian, and many of them didn't conceal their disdain at all. The Emperor Hound shook its head when it witnessed this scene. It was fine for a person to be arrogant. So long as one possessed sufficient strength, then one could be arrogant. However, if one was arrogant without strength, then one was an idiot. Especially when one was arrogant before someone stronger than one. Punish. The Emperor Hound knew that the God clan had to be ruthlessly punished. Only then might the God clan be able to. There was still some hope. Yi Xian glanced at them and said, "I'm a human." An uproar swept through the surroundings when they heard this. Moreover, the disdain in the eyes of many members of the God clan wasn't concealed at all. Yi Xian grinned, "But now, I'm the king of your God clan." On what basis? Meanwhile, a man from the God clan walked forward, and he gazed coldly at Yi Xian as he spoke with disdain. "On what basis does a human like you become the king of our God clan?" Yi Xian gazed at the man. "I know that all of you look down on humans. Let me tell all of you that I don't want to make an example out of you, nor do I want to kill to establish my might. But if it's necessary, then I'll definitely do it. So, it's best that all of you keep a low profile before me, otherwise." The man laughed coldly. "Otherwise what?" "You." Suddenly the man's voice stopped abruptly, and then his head fell off his neck. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. Everyone here was stunned. Yi Xian grinned. "Otherwise that's it." Not far away, Lian Wan'er looked at Yi Xian without saying anything. "You dare to kill." At this moment, a man suddenly walked forward and he glared at Yi Xian. Just as he was about to say something, his head flew off in an instant. Everyone was speechless. Yi Xian smiled. "Is there anyone else who wants to come out? Don't worry, my sword will guarantee a painless death." All the experts of the God clan glared at Yi Xian, but they didn't dare to say anything. Yi Xian walked in front of the group of God clan members and shook his head. "You're weak, too weak. It's fine if you're weak, but all of you are so arrogant that you look down on humans. Let me ask you, what right do you have to look down on humans? Do you know? Right now there are too many forces out there that can annihilate you." As he spoke, he pointed at a man from the God clan who was glaring at him. "Your eyes are filled with disdain and killing intent, but what can you do? Anger is the expression of the incompetent." As he said this, he looked around at the people of the God clan. "In front of me, you have no right to be arrogant. If you do, please defeat me and tell me with your actions instead of looking at me angrily like you are now." At this moment, a little girl walked out. She was not very old, around 14 or 15 years old, and she was very beautiful. It should be said that the women of the God clan were all very beautiful. The little girl looked at Yi Xian. "Human, you're very strong, stronger than us. However, you're a human and we're the God clan. We don't need humans to tell us what to do." As Yi Xian walked towards the little girl, the expressions of the God clan experts changed, and they all stood in front of the little girl. At this moment, the little girl walked out. "No need, I'm not afraid of him." As she said this, she looked straight at Yi Xian without a trace of fear in her eyes. Yi Xian walked in front of the little girl and smiled. "If I want, I can kill all of you now." As he spoke, he gently pinched the little girl's cheek. "See, I can still do whatever I want." The experts of the God race were infuriated. One of the old men was about to attack when a sword was pressed against the center of his forehead. Thus no one dared to move again. The little girl looked straight at Yi Xian. She just looked at him. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Do you understand?" The little girl looked away and fell silent. Yi Xian squatted in front of the little girl. "I have to admit that the God race was very strong in the past, but that was in the past. Moreover, that strength has nothing to do with you. The God race was strong in the past because the God race was very strong. But now you are very weak and yet you refuse to admit it. The glory of the god race in the past is not something you can be proud of now. Right now, all of you can do is use the formation to prolong your existence. Proud? When he spoke up to here, he glanced at the others and said, "Tell me, what do all of you have to be proud of? I'm so outstanding. Am I proud? I have everything. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. If you're not proud, what right do you have to be proud?" The corners of the Emperor Hound's mouth twitched. Even Wan'er's expression was somewhat strange. At this time, the little girl looked up at Yi Xian. "You want to be the god race's king?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." The little girl said, "But you're not from the god race." Yi Xian smiled and then said, "Let me ask you, do you want to prolong your existence like this, or do you want to revive the god race?" The little girl looked at Yi Xian and said, "Revive the god race." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "If you want to revive the Protoss, you have to go out and meet the forces out there. You have to see how strong they are. And you have to learn. You have to learn from humans and other clans." The little girl said in a low voice, "Are the humans outside as powerful as you?" Yi Xian looked at the little girl. "No, there are many people outside who are weaker than me, but there are also many who are stronger than me. There are many who are much, much stronger." At this time a man suddenly said, "Dan, don't listen to him. He's a human, he can't be trusted." The little girl called Dan, looked at the man, "Then you defeat him." The man's expression suddenly became somewhat ugly. Yi Xian looked at the little girl with some surprise. He realized that this little girl's position in the god race was not simple. Dan turned to Yi Xian and said, "Why do you want to help the god race?" Yi Xian smiled and then pointed at the Emperor Hound lying not far away. "There are 3 reasons. First, it is my friend. It wants me to come to the god race and be on good terms with the god race. Second, I have received benefits from the god race. I promised that senior that I would help the god race. Third, I also hope that the god race can become stronger so that we can have a powerful ally." Danner looked at Yi Xian and then walked in front of the Emperor Hound. The Emperor Hound looked at Danner in front of it and did not speak. Danner looked at the Emperor Hound. "You are the Emperor Hound, right?" The Emperor Hound was slightly surprised. "You know me?" Danner nodded. "You are the divine beast protector of my god race. All those years ago you fought for my god race until the end. Even though I don't know where you went in the end, it's all thanks to you and those divine generals that the members of the god race are still alive." The Emperor Hound fell silent. Dan suddenly glanced at Yi Xian and said, "He's a human. Since you're by his side, it's obvious that you trust him. Can we trust him as well?" The Emperor Hound nodded slightly, "Yes." It really trusted Yi Xian. Perhaps Yi Xian would play dirty tricks against his enemies, but it had never seen Yi Xian play tricks against his own people. Dan nodded slightly, "I understand." As she spoke, she turned around and walked over to Yi Xian, and then she knelt down slowly. "I'm willing to appoint you as the king of the god race." The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Meanwhile, even Wan'er had knelt down slowly as well. It didn't take long before more and more people knelt down. At this moment, the divine king's throne suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Unlike before, there were 2 large golden words hovering above the throne this time, Yi Xian. As soon as Yi Xian sat down on it, something strange happened. With him as the center, all the spiritual energy within a radius of 50,000 kilometers suddenly vanished. P.S. Recently, I've encountered a disgusting incident. My pen name has been registered as a trademark. It's not just me, many other authors have encountered the same thing. If the other party succeeds in registering it, it means that this name isn't mine anymore. If I write books or publish anything else using this name in the future, it might be against the law. I want to curse someone. The other party is registering trademarks in batches, and many web authors have had their trademarks registered by them. This is really the behavior of bandits. Right now, I'm also looking for information to protect my rights, but I know, it's very, very difficult. It's extremely difficult for an individual to protect his rights in the country. If it comes to that, I'm prepared to cry. I'll cry until I die. I'll move them. End of this chapter. Chapter 508. Yi Xian was taken aback by what he had seen. He hurried to get down from the tree. Even Wan'er and the others had solemn expressions. Yi Xian looked at the Emperor Hound. "What happened just now?" The Emperor Hound said solemnly, "Dao Law." "Dao Law?" Yi Xian was stunned. "That's a Dao Law?" The Emperor Hound nodded. "A divine artifact that has reached the Dao realm has its own Dao Law. The Divine King's Throne's Dao Law is the Spirit Restriction Dao Law. Once activated, it can instantly absorb all the spirit chi it covers. Saying this, it looked at Yi Xian. If you sit on it, you can instantly absorb all the spirit qi in a radius of 100,000 kilometers for your own use. Monstrous. That was Yi Xian's first thought. With this thing, didn't it mean that he wouldn't need spirit qi? Not only that, but it also meant that his opponent wouldn't have spirit qi to use. It was too monstrous. Yi Xian seemed to think of something and hurriedly asked, I also have Dao laws. Dao laws? He had 3 Dao laws in his body. Although they were powerful, apart from the Dream Dao law, the other 2 Dao laws were also powerful, but they weren't as monstrous as the Spirit Restriction Dao law. The Emperor Hound said softly, your 3 Dao laws are actually stronger than the Spirit Restriction Dao law. However, you can't truly unleash their power. As for the Spirit Restriction Dao law, you can unleash at least half of its power through the Divine King's throne. In short, it's very heaven-defying. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Actually, if he could unleash half of the power of the Grand Dao Law and Space Dao Law, they would definitely be more terrifying than the Spirit Restriction Dao Law. After all, these 2 Dao Laws were from the prison pagoda. However, the Spirit Restriction Dao Law was also very monstrous. Yi Xian put away the Divine King's throne. At this moment, he realized that the surrounding Protoss experts were looking at him differently. Divine King's sword. Divine King's throne. These 2 Protoss supreme treasures were in Yi Xian's hands. What did this mean? It meant that Yi Xian had passed the Protoss trial. At this moment, there was no longer any disdain in the eyes of the Protoss. There was only a complicated expression. Yi Xian looked at Danner in front of him. What cultivation level are you at now? Fortune realm. Danner said. Yi Xian was stunned. Danner looked at Yi Xian and repeated, Blessed realm. Yi Xian turned to look at Lian Wanner. Lian Wanner said in a low voice, Danner has a divine root. He is the most outstanding among the younger generation of our god race. The most outstanding person. Yi Xian sized up Danner. Needless to say, this little girl wasn't bad at all. She was neither servile nor overbearing, and she was a promising talent. What's next? Lian Wanner suddenly asked. Yi Xian said softly, Contact the outside world. As he spoke, he looked at the divine race members in front of him. Is there anyone from the younger generation who wants to go out and have a look? Danner was the first to step forward. And at this time a youth also stood up. Soon more and more Celestials came out to fight. There were hundreds of young Celestials. Yi Xian shook his head. That's too many. I only need 10 people. Only 10 people can leave this place with me. What? Danner suddenly asked. Yi Xian smiled. The divine race isn't very strong right now. If you go out like this, you'll bring disaster upon the divine race. Do you understand? Danner said softly, Is the divine race really that weak? Yi Xian nodded. You should go out and have a look. Experience the human race and the other races. Danner looked at Yi Xian. Will the divine race regain its former glory? Yi Xian swept his gaze over the crowd. That's up to you. The future of the divine race isn't in my hands but yours. With that, he looked at Lian Wanner. Choose 10 of the most outstanding of the divine race's younger generation. Lian Wanner nodded. All right. With that, she turned to the group of youths. Before long, 10 youths stepped forward, 6 men and 4 women. Including Danner, there were 11 in total. Yi Xian looked at the 11 in front of him. You are the most outstanding of the divine race. You will shoulder the heavy burden of the divine race's revival. The first step is to learn from the humans. At this time, a man looked at Yi Xian. We won't be any worse than the humans. Yi Xian walked up to the man. What's your name? The man looked directly at Yi Xian. Zhang Lianyue. Yi Xian nodded. I'm a human too. Do you think there's anything about me that you can learn from? Zhang Lianyue looked at Yi Xian in silence. Yi Xian said, Strength is everything. I'm stronger than you, so I'm worth learning from. Do you understand? In the outside world, I believe that there are many humans who are stronger than you, and there are even many who are stronger than me. I'll say it again. I'm so outstanding, but I'm not proud. What right do you have to be proud? The crowd. Yi Xian looked at Danner. You're the big sister, right? Danner nodded. Yes. Yi Xian said, Now I'll give you a mission. Bring them to Shenwu City. Danner asked, And then? Yi Xian smiled. And then survive. Survive. It wasn't that easy to survive outside. He wanted these people to go to Shenwu City because he wanted them to change. He wanted them to change their views on humans and other races. If the divine race wanted to change, they had to change the younger generation first. Danner bowed slightly. I'll bring them back alive. With that, she turned to the 10 people. Let's go. Just like that, Dan led the 10 people away. She left decisively. The remaining divine race people looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said softly, "As for you guys, just live well." With that he looked at Lian Wan. "Who's the strongest among the divine race now?" Lian Wan looked at Master Mo. Master Mo's expression was ugly. Yi Xian looked at Master Mo. After a moment of silence he said, "Continue to hide this location with the Great Array. Don't let the outside forces know about this place. Otherwise, the divine race was too rich. If the outside forces knew about this, the divine race would be finished." Lian Waner said in a low voice, "Will you leave?" Yi Xian nodded. "I'm going to the ancient demon race. But don't worry. If anything happens here you can inform me at any time. Also, the divine race needs to develop. The entire race needs to develop. We can't just eat and wait for death here. Especially since the divine race has so many treasures, but you guys don't have the strength to match them." Lian Waner nodded. "I know." With that, she looked at Yi Xian. "What I want to know is, can the divine race really rise again?" Yi Xian said softly, "That depends on the younger generation of the divine race." Lian Waner walked over to Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. "It depends on you." Yi Xian looked at Lian Waner. Lian Waner looked back at him. "If the divine race wants to leave this place, then it depends on you. The entire divine race has already followed you. In the future we will share both honor and disgrace with you. If you are disgraced, then the divine race will be disgraced. If you are honored, then the divine race will be honored as well." All the members of the divine race were looking at Yi Xian. The Emperor Hound was looking at Yi Xian as well. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he said softly, "So long as I'm alive, no one can bully the divine race." A smile appeared on Lian Waner's face, and then she slowly knelt down in front of everyone. "Greetings, Divine King." The other members of the divine race slowly knelt down as well. This time they truly acknowledged Yi Xian. Yi Xian fell silent. At this moment he truly felt pressured. He was in charge of the entire divine race. Of course it was his responsibility. After all, he'd obtained so many benefits from the divine race. Yi Xian gazed at Lian Waner. "Those 11 will give all of you a huge surprise in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around to look at the Emperor Hound. "Let's go." The Emperor Hound walked over to Yi Xian. "Get up here." Yi Xian was stunned and then he smiled. "Brother Emperor Hound, you're my friend in my heart." The Emperor Hound said, "I know. That's why I asked you to come up here." Yi Xian smiled and didn't refuse. He immediately leaped onto the Emperor Hound's back, and it didn't take long for the Emperor Hound to bring Yi Xian along and vanish into the boundless sky. Lian Waner looked up into the sky and seemed to be lost in thought. Meanwhile, Emosher floated over to her and spoke softly, "Why did he pass the trial?" Lian Waner spoke softly, "Do you still not understand? Our divine race needs a leader." Originally, Palace Lord Jian was the most suitable person to be the leader, but you should know that she would never return. Saying this, she looked up into the sky. And he should be the most suitable. Although his current strength isn't particularly strong with his talent and potential, it should only be a matter of time before he becomes a peerless almighty. At that time, our divine race will naturally have a way out by following him. Emosher shook his head. "I never thought that our divine race would fall to such a state," Lian Waner said. "If Princess Jian was still in the divine race." Saying this, she didn't continue. "Jian Zizai." Although this woman had slaughtered almost the entire divine race royal family and the strongest of the divine race back then, the descendants still couldn't hate her. Because the divine race had let her down first. If the divine race hadn't let her down with her there, the divine race would definitely have been able to survive that crisis. At his peak, Jian Zizai was truly invincible back then. If the divine race had her, they would definitely have been able to reach a higher level. Unfortunately, this woman had personally destroyed the divine race. This was the tragedy of the divine race. Beside Lian Wan, Emosher smiled bitterly. "Princess Jian, I'm afraid she won't come back." Lian Waner nodded. "No matter what, he is now the king of our divine race. Our divine race and him are bound together for good or ill. I have a feeling that he will be even better than Princess Jian back then." Emosher nodded. "I hope so." After Yi Xian and the Emperor Dog left the divine race, they went straight to the ancient demon race. Right now, his greatest weakness was his physical body. On the way, the Emperor Dog suddenly asked, "Kid, did you see the divine king?" Yi Xian nodded. The Emperor Dog said in a deep voice, "What did he say?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "He said he saw that I was talented and had amazing bones, a super monster rarely seen in 10,000 years. If I agreed to inherit the Divine King's sword for him, he wouldn't let me go. Stop, stop. The Emperor Dog suddenly said, my mouth is cheap, okay? Yi Xian. Chapter 509. Cheap Mouth. The Emperor Dog really could not stand Yi Xian anymore. When one was shameless, one was truly invincible. Hearing the Emperor Dog's words, Yi Xian laughed, then sat on the Emperor Dog's back and began to cultivate Divine Blood Technique. Ever since cultivating this Divine Blood Technique, he found that he had become very sensitive to blood. For example, at this moment he could actually feel the Emperor Dog's blood. If he wanted to, he could even control the Emperor Dog's blood. Strange. Powerful. The more he cultivated, the more Yi Xian felt that this Divine Blood Technique was extraordinarily powerful. Apart from that, he now had the Divine King Sword and the Divine King Throne. The Divine King Sword could summon the dragon soul to possess the body and control the power of the Divine Dragon. The Divine King Throne could seal the world's spiritual energy and turn it into his own. Apart from that, he also had the soul-suppressing sword. And that wooden figure. That wooden man's strength was also very formidable. He now had a lot of external objects, and each of them was heaven-defying. The more this was so, the more vigilant he became. Because many times, people would unknowingly develop a dependence. The more external objects he had, the more he had to focus on cultivating himself. He was now at the Nether Passage realm, and above him was the 10,000 Arts realm. His current goal was the 10,000 Arts realm. 10,000 Arts realm, sensing the world. Yi Xian calmed down and focused, quietly sensing everything around him. The Emperor Dog did not disturb Yi Xian and even slowed down. Somewhere in the darkness, an old man hid in the void. He looked down at Yi Xian and the Emperor Dog with cold eyes. At this moment, the old man suddenly turned his head to the right. Who? Kiki? A cold voice suddenly sounded, and soon, a red shadow appeared not far to the old man's right. The old man frowned slightly. Who are you? The red shadow laughed sinisterly. I didn't expect the dignified deputy sect master of the Order sect to secretly follow someone. The old man glanced coldly at the red shadow. Where did this rascal come from? As his voice fell, he flicked his right sleeve. Boom. The space where the red shadow was instantly shattered, but the red shadow suddenly appeared not far behind him. The old man frowned slightly and slowly clenched his right hand. The red shadow laughed. Want to kill me? Unless your Star Lord personally arrives. Of course I can't kill you either. The old man was expressionless. Your target is also that Yi Xian. The red shadow said, nonsense. If it wasn't for that treasure, why would I follow a little brat? The old man said indifferently, he's right below us and he's only in the Nether Passage realm. If you make a move, you can definitely kill him in an instant. The red shadow chuckled, why don't you do it? The old man glanced coldly at the red shadow and didn't say anything. The red silhouette said with a smile, although your Star Master tried his best to conceal it, what happened in the never-ending starfield has already spread throughout the all-heaven starfield. Someone who can make your Star Lord lose an avatar is not simple. The elder turned his head and looked into the distance. In his line of sight, Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound were already walking further and further away. At that moment, the red silhouette said, as far as I know, there seems to be a mysterious expert behind Yi Xian, and this mysterious expert seems to be a swordsman, right? The old man said coldly, you must not be an ordinary person to dare to compete with the Order sect. Why don't you tell us who you are? The red silhouette said with a smile, guess. The old man said indifferently, cowardly rat. With that, he turned and chased after Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound in the distance. At that moment, the red silhouette suddenly laughed and said, Yi Xian, someone is following you. The voice was like thunder and it instantly spread to the ends of the world. In the distance, the old man suddenly stopped and turned to look at the red silhouette with a fierce expression. You deserve to die. The red silhouette laughed, turned and disappeared. In the distance, Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound suddenly stopped. On the back of the Emperor Hound, Yi Xian raised his head and looked around, but he didn't see anything. Who's talking? The Emperor Hound asked. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't know. With that, he closed his eyes. At the same time, the dragon soul suddenly entered his body. In an instant, Yi Xian's divine sense was like a piece of paper that covered the surrounding world. A moment later, Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at the void on the horizon. In the void, the old man's expression changed and he looked down at Yi Xian. However, at that moment Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound had disappeared. Seeing this, the old man flew into a rage. Damn it! Yi Xian had run away. The old man's face turned green with anger. As if he had thought of something, his expression suddenly became solemn. How did Yi Xian find him? The old man looked down and frowned. In that instant Yi Xian was looking at his current position. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for Yi Xian to find him. Moreover, why had Yi Xian suddenly disappeared? It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. After a long time, the old man glanced coldly at the surroundings, and then he turned and disappeared. Somewhere on the ground below, Yi Xian looked up into the sky. Who's following me? The Emperor Hound said solemnly, it might be because of that treasure of yours. Yi Xian nodded. Probably. The Emperor Hound said, from now on, you should be more careful. Yi Xian said softly, they won't give up on me. The Emperor Hound said, of course. Since you have that treasure, you should be prepared to face an endless stream of enemies. Yi Xian smiled. Let's go. To the ancient devil clan. Soon the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian vanished not too far away. In the void, the old man didn't give up and continued to search. Along the way, his divine sense constantly swept the ground below. However, Yi Xian seemed to have really vanished. He couldn't find even a trace of his aura. The old man frowned. How is this possible? As he spoke, he directly landed on the ground. At that moment he was in a dense forest. The leaves around him were so dense that even the wind couldn't pass through. This was the place where Yi Xian had disappeared. The old man glanced around. It was extremely quiet and there was nothing around. Just as he was about to leave, his expression suddenly changed. He slammed his right hand forward. Boom. In an instant, with him as the center, the trees within a radius of 100 zhang were instantly turned to dust. At the same time, the ground collapsed layer by layer. The moment his palm landed, a figure flew out in front of him. This figure flew more than 1,000 feet before finally crashing heavily onto the ground. This figure was Yi Xian. At that moment, Yi Xian's body had collapsed, and his soul was rapidly dissipating. The old man's lips curled into a mocking smile. You really overestimate yourself. Someone like you, as he spoke, his pupils suddenly constricted. No. As he spoke, Yi Xian's soul, who was not far away from him, suddenly disappeared. However, the trees around him were still there and the ground did not collapse. The only difference was that there was one more person behind him. This person was Yi Xian. The old man looked in front of him in a daze. No. Impossible. This is definitely impossible. As he spoke, a wound suddenly appeared on his throat and blood flowed out. His soul wanted to escape, but it seemed to be fixed in place within his body. This sword attack was a fatal blow from the body to the soul. Behind the old man, Yi Xian sheathed his sword and walked into the distance. However, soon he suddenly stopped. Do you want to know what that sword attack was called? The old man used his last breath to ask. What? What? Yi Xian paused slightly before saying, I'm not telling you. Haha. The old man spat out a mouthful of blood and died on the spot. P.S. Yesterday a reader added me on WeChat and said that I have a ticket, but I'm not giving it to you. Chapter 510. After Yi Xian absorbed the old man's soul with the soul-suppressing sword, he turned around and left. On the way, Yi Xian was a little excited. Just now, he'd used the Dream Dao Law to cast the Dreamland within a Dreamland. Fortunately, he had used Dream within Dream. Otherwise, he would not have been able to kill the other party with a single layer of Dream. Actually, he was very clear that the old man's strength was much stronger than his. The reason why he was able to kill the old man was because he attacked first and ambushed him, as well as the old man's carelessness. If they were to fight head-on, his chances of winning were less than 30%. If he couldn't kill his opponent, he would have to retreat. Of course, this referred to those who were much stronger than him. Now that he had the Dream Dao Law, the Space Dao Law, and the soul-suppressing sword, he was confident that he could instantly kill a powerhouse who was much stronger than him. Moreover, it was an instant kill where even his soul wouldn't be able to escape. If many powerhouses reacted quickly, they could abandon their bodies to protect their souls. However, with the soul-suppressing sword, it was impossible for the other party to protect their souls. Even if they could protect their souls, it would be easy for him to kill the other party. Because his sword skills and sword heavenly were the bane of soul bodies. The Emperor Dog suddenly said, Kid, to be honest, I really admire you. On the back of the Emperor Dog, Yi Xian was a little curious. What do you admire about me? The Emperor Hound said, treating a swordsman as an assassin. You're not just an ordinary person. Yi Xian laughed. Swordsman? Assassin. What was the sword used for? Naturally, it was to kill. Assassins kill people, swordsmen also kill people. Is there a difference in essence? In any case, in his eyes there was no difference. Not long after Yi Xian and the monarch hound left, a red figure appeared. Looking at the old man's corpse on the ground, the red shadow was silent for a long time before softly saying, "What a monster!" With that he disappeared. On the road, Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Brother Emperor Dog, how is your strength recovering?" The Emperor Hound said, "He can already transform." Yi Xian asked, "How strong is it?" The Emperor Dog said indifferently, "Guess." Yi Xian smiled and said, "It should be a little stronger than before." The Emperor Hound said, "That old man you just killed, I can kill him head-on." Yi Xian was speechless. The Emperor Hound looked into the distance. "How much longer until we arrive?" Yi Xian said softly, "Soon." The ancient demon clan. When he came out, the divine king had already told him where the ancient demon clan was. Of course, it wasn't the exact location but the general direction. Moreover, it was still unknown if any of the ancient demons were still alive. However, he still wanted to try his luck. His greatest weakness now was his physical body. If his physical body could be strengthened, his overall strength would increase by a large margin. Right now, his physical body was his greatest shortcoming. About 2 hours later, Yi Xian and the Emperor Dog suddenly stopped. At this time they were already on a continent. On this continent, the spiritual qi was thin, and the sky was gloomy. Yi Xian looked around. "Is this where the ancient demons used to live?" The Emperor Hound said indifferently, "I don't know." Yi Xian said, "Brother Emperor Hound, in any case, you are from the same generation as them, how could you not know?" The Emperor Hound said, "I haven't had any dealings with them, but the ancient demon clan's physical body is indeed unique." Yi Xian looked around and said, "The ancient demon clan should have declined." The Emperor Hound said, "My divine clan and the Nether clan have fallen to such a state, what about them?" Yi Xian said, "Come on, let's look around." The Emperor Dog nodded. Then it disappeared not far away with Yi Xian. About half an hour later, Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound arrived in front of an ancient city. The city was very large, but it was filled with an unpleasant smell of corrosion. Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound entered the city. The city was extremely desolate, and all sorts of weeds and vines grew all around. The Emperor Hound said, "There should be no one here." Yi Xian nodded. He swept the surroundings with his divine sense, but there was no sign of life. A short while later, Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound were about to leave. However, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and disappeared in the next moment. Yi Xian soon appeared in front of a great hall. The hall was covered in weeds and only the roof was visible. Yi Xian waved his right hand and 2 flying swords flew out. It didn't take long for the weeds to disappear. After the weeds were cut down, a middle-aged man with a bare upper body was sitting cross-legged below. Alive. Yi Xian frowned slightly as he landed in front of the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's hair was draped over his shoulders, and his hands were placed on his knees. There was no aura coming from him. The Emperor Hound said in a low voice, "Dead?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't know." As he spoke, he sized up the middle-aged man. "Senior?" No response. Yi Xian thought about it and said, "Hello, Senior. I'm Yi Xian from the Firmament World. I've heard that the ancient devil clan's physical body is extremely powerful, so I've come to seek guidance." Still no response. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, "If Senior wants to leave behind the inheritance of the ancient devil clan, not choosing me would be the greatest loss to the ancient devil clan." The corners of the Emperor Hound's mouth twitched. This guy is in shameless mode again. However, the middle-aged man still didn't respond. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, "Sorry for disturbing you." He looked at the Emperor Hound. "Let's go." The Emperor Hound was stunned. "You're giving up just like that?" Yi Xian said, "What else can I do?" The Emperor Hound, Yi Xian smiled. "Let's go." The Emperor Hound hesitated for a moment before it nodded, and then it left with Yi Xian. "Human." Right at that moment, a voice suddenly resounded from behind Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound. Yi Xian turned around. In front of them, there was a soul floating in the air above the middle-aged man. It was the middle-aged man's soul. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian, and then he tapped lightly with his right hand. This tap caused Yi Xian to feel as if his entire body had been frozen in place. In the next moment, an illusory Xiaota appeared between Yi Xian's brows. However, in the next moment, the illusory Xiaota suddenly trembled violently, and then a dazzling black light erupted from it. The middle-aged man's face fell, and he smashed his fist down. Bang! The black light shattered, and the prison pagoda returned to Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian retreated a few meters. He looked at the middle-aged man. At this moment, the middle-aged man's soul was becoming more and more illusory, and it had almost disappeared a few times. The prison pagoda had attacked. He hadn't been controlling the prison pagoda just now, but the prison pagoda itself. Could it be that this fellow is about to wake up? He hadn't forgotten that the prison pagoda had a pagoda spirit. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Who exactly are you?" Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man. At this moment, the middle-aged man's expression was incomparably solemn. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Senior, don't act recklessly." In that instant just now, the middle-aged man had clearly noticed the prison pagoda, but the prison pagoda had counterattacked. The middle-aged man sized up Yi Xian. "That thing isn't simple at all." Yi Xian said, "Senior, I came here to learn the ancient devil race's Tao of the body." The middle-aged man fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "The inheritance of the ancient devil race is not passed on to outsiders." Yi Xian nodded slightly, "I understand." As he spoke, he looked at the Emperor Hound. "Let's go. Let's go." The Emperor Hound nodded, and then it was about to leave with Yi Xian. However, the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Human." Yi Xian stopped and turned to look at the middle-aged man. The latter stared at him. "You have the Divine King Sword of the Divine Race and the Soul-Suppressing Sword of the Nether Race." Yi Xian fell silent. How did this man see through my treasures? As if he knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the middle-aged man explained, "This is an ancient secret technique of my ancient devil race, called the aura observation technique. It allows one to see through one's opponent and observe the phenomena of heaven and earth. In short, it has many benefits." Yi Xian nodded slightly, "I understand." The middle-aged man said, "Since you obtained the soul-suppressing sword and the Divine King Sword, you must have seen the Divine King and the Nether King." Yi Xian nodded, "I have." The middle-aged man asked, "Are they still alive?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly, "I don't know." He really didn't know if the Nether King and Divine King were still alive. But according to his guess, they shouldn't be alive. Especially the Divine King. If he was still alive, he would definitely take care of the divine race. After a moment of silence, the middle-aged man asked softly, "Do you really want to learn my ancient devil race's Tao of the body?" Yi Xian nodded, "I really want to." The middle-aged man said, "I have one condition." Yi Xian said, "Please speak, senior." The middle-aged man said softly, "Vengeance." "Vengeance?" Yi Xian was stunned. The middle-aged man said, "The reason why my ancient devil race was destroyed in the past was not only because of our enemies, but also because of a traitor. If you want to obtain my ancient devil race's inheritance, you must promise to eliminate that traitor from my ancient devil race." Yi Xian asked solemnly, "Is the traitor strong?" The middle-aged man nodded, "Very strong." Yi Xian asked again, "How strong?" The middle-aged man said, "It's better if you don't know." Yi Xian, the middle-aged man said, "It's your choice. Moreover, if you accept the ancient devil race's inheritance, even if you don't kill her, she will kill you." "What?" Yi Xian was puzzled. The middle-aged man said softly, "Because she wants the ancient devil race to die." Yi Xian was stunned, then said, "She is also from the ancient devil race?" The middle-aged man nodded. Yi Xian was puzzled, "Then why?" The middle-aged man was silent for a moment, then said, "She secretly married the enemy of my ancient devil race. When the clan leader found out, he executed her son and daughter on the spot." At this point, his expression became a little unnatural. Yi Xian was also a little speechless. This is the second Gen Zizai. No, different from Gen Zizai, this is even more ruthless, directly exterminating my entire race. But then again, if it were me, I would also do the same. I will never allow anyone to hurt my family. Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man. "Senior, forgive me for being blunt, this is your clan leader's fault." The middle-aged man nodded. "It's a little unjust, but she caused the death of my entire race." As he said this, he looked at Yi Xian. "If you want the ancient devil race's inheritance, you have to promise me that you will get rid of her." Yi Xian shook his head decisively. "I'm sorry, I don't want the ancient devil race's inheritance anymore." The middle-aged man asked, "Why?" Yi Xian said, "Because I think what she did was right. If it were me, I would do it even more ruthlessly than she did." After saying this, he turned and left. Just as Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound were about to leave, a loud laugh suddenly sounded from behind him and the Emperor Hound. Hearing this laughter, Yi Xian felt a little creeped out. That was because the laughter belonged to a woman. Chapter 511. A woman's voice. Yi Xian turned around. Behind him, the middle-aged man's soul had disappeared and was replaced by a woman. It was a woman wearing a long red dress. The woman's hair draped over her shoulders and she exuded a vicious aura. Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man sitting cross-legged on the ground. He died at Senior's hands? The woman in red sneered, "You have a problem with that?" Yi Xian frowned. Did this woman eat gunpowder? Next to Yi Xian, the Emperor Hound looked at the woman in red, ready to attack. The woman in red looked at the Emperor Hound. "I didn't think that the dignified guardian beast of the divine tribe would follow a human." The Emperor Hound said indifferently, "None of your business." The woman in red's eyes turned cold and in the next moment she disappeared. The moment the woman disappeared, the Emperor Hound also disappeared. At the same time, Yi Xian pointed with his finger and two flying swords crisscrossed in the air. Chi-chi. Boom boom. A breath later, the scene returned to normal. The woman in red had returned to her original position and the Emperor Hound had retreated to Yi Xian's side. The woman in red looked at Yi Xian, her face cold. Yi Xian was expressionless. "We don't want to know about the ancient demon tribe's grievances. We came here to obtain the ancient demon tribe's inheritance." The woman in red sneered, "The ancient demon tribe is extinct." Yi Xian was silent for a moment and then nodded, "Sorry for disturbing you." With that, he turned and left with the Emperor Hound. At this moment, the man sitting on the ground with his legs crossed suddenly opened his eyes. The next moment he suddenly dashed forward. Yi Xian suddenly turned around. When he was about to attack, a voice rang in his head. "Don't resist." As soon as he finished speaking, he pointed his finger out. In an instant, a beam of white light disappeared between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Soon, countless pieces of information flowed into Yi Xian's mind. Inheritance. The ancient demon tribe's inheritance. Not far away, the woman in red's expression suddenly changed and in the next moment, she seemed to have gone mad. "You're not dead." As soon as she finished speaking, she charged directly towards the man and Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, "Brother Emperor Dog, stop her." As soon as Yi Xian's voice fell, the Emperor Hound dashed out. The red-dressed woman roared, "Scram!" However, the Emperor Dog Bird ignored her. Soon, the Arch-Hound and the red-dressed woman started fighting. On the other side, countless pieces of information flowed into Yi Xian's mind. All of them were the inheritances of the ancient demons. Just like that, after about a quarter of an hour, the middle-aged man stopped. Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man who was sitting on the ground. He looked at Yi Xian and said, "The inheritance of the ancient demon clan is all here." Yi Xian asked in a low voice, "Has the ancient demon clan really been wiped out?" The middle-aged man nodded. Yi Xian looked at the woman not far away. "She did it?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "Not entirely. She's also a pitiful person." Then he looked at Yi Xian. "The strongest part of the ancient demon's inheritance is the physical cultivation method. However, it is not easy to cultivate the physical body. You must be mentally prepared." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." The middle-aged man turned to the red-dressed woman and said, "Spare her life." Yi Xian nodded. "I'll try my best." The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian and said, "Let's go." Yi Xian bowed to the middle-aged man and said, "Thank you very much." He looked at the Emperor Hound in the distance and said, "Brother Emperor Hound, let's go." In the distance, the Emperor Hound's body trembled and it retreated to Yi Xian's side. The red-dressed woman did not intend to give up and was about to attack again when the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Suong." The red-dressed woman stopped and turned to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man said softly, "It was all because of me. Didn't you want to kill me? Come." The woman in the red dress floated directly in front of the middle-aged man. She suddenly slammed her palm towards the middle-aged man's head, but stopped a few inches away from his head. The red-dressed woman glared at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man looked at the woman and chuckled. It would have been great if he hadn't appeared. The red-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man and said, "You killed him." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "I don't regret it." The red-dressed woman's face gradually became ferocious. The middle-aged man's smile did not diminish. "If I could do it all over again, I would still kill him." The red-dressed woman suddenly stopped and turned to leave. The middle-aged man said, "Don't provoke him. He not only has the Divine King sword but also the soul-subduing sword and that mysterious thing." The woman in the red dress stopped in her tracks and turned around to look at the middle-aged man. "Although we were engaged back then, you know that I've never liked you." The middle-aged man chuckled. "I know, but without him you would have married me, right?" The red-dressed woman was silent. The middle-aged man said softly, "He didn't love you as much as I did." The red-dressed woman slowly closed her eyes. "To me it's a burden." The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. Yes, you don't like me. No matter how much I like you, this love is a burden to you. The red-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man. I want every member of the ancient demon clan to die and disappear from this world. The middle-aged man said softly, he's not simple. If you go, you'll only be digging your own grave. The red-dressed woman said fiercely, I'll die with him. The middle-aged man looked at the red-dressed woman with a complicated expression. You've always felt that our clan has let you down. But have you ever thought about how the person you love treated the ancient demon clan? And him, when he killed the members of our ancient demon clan, did he show any mercy? And clan leader, you fell in love with our mortal enemy and protected him. Have you ever thought about how he felt? Didn't he do many things for you back then? And have you ever thought about your brothers and sisters? Your younger brother died in their hands. Also, have you ever thought about me? You and I were engaged, but you still chose him. Have you ever thought about my feelings? Have you ever thought about my clan's situation? The red-dressed woman shouted angrily, I don't care about that. The middle-aged man shook his head. You're too selfish. You don't care about anyone but him. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand. With this wave, an invisible force directly locked onto the woman in red. The red-dressed woman tried to break free but failed. The middle-aged man said softly, he has the ancient demon clan's inheritance. It's the only inheritance. I can't let you hurt him. As soon as she finished speaking, the red-dressed woman's body actually began to gradually turn illusory. The red-dressed woman shouted angrily, let me out. The middle-aged man ignored the red-dressed woman. He took out a hairpin and looked at it with an infatuated look. Not far away, the red-dressed woman shouted angrily. The middle-aged man ignored the red-dressed woman. His body became more and more illusory. On the other side, Yi Xian and the Monarch hound left the ancient demon clan. On the way, the Monarch hound said, that woman is crazy. Yi Xian laughed. When a woman goes crazy, she can be very abnormal. The Monarch hound said softly, back then at this point it didn't continue. Yi Xian knew that the Monarch hound was talking about Jian Zizai. He found that not only did many gods not hate Jian Zizai, they even respected her. At this time, the Monarch hound suddenly said, you've obtained the ancient demon clan's inheritance? Yi Xian nodded. Let's find a place to rest first. I need to organize those things. The Monarch hound nodded. Not long after, Yi Xian found a mountain range. In front of a pool, Yi Xian sat cross-legged and began to organize the ancient demon clan's inheritance in his mind. This time, he had obtained many inheritances, but there were very few that were truly useful to him. What he lacked the most was his body. As for martial arts, although the ancient demon clans were powerful, they weren't suitable for him. What was more suitable for him was the cultivation of the body. Invincible tyrant body. This was the supreme cultivation method of the ancient demon clan. If he successfully cultivated it, his body would enter the tyrant body state. In this state, his body would be close to invincible and could withstand all secret techniques. It was described to be very powerful, almost invincible. However, Yi Xian knew that no cultivation method or sword technique was invincible. If he encountered a powerful opponent, he would still be finished. Of course, the strength of the ancient demon clan's invincible tyrant body was unquestionable. Yi Xian concentrated on studying the invincible tyrant body. After a while, he suddenly stood up. The Monarch hound looked at Yi Xian and asked, "What are you doing?" Yi Xian said excitedly, "To cultivate the invincible tyrant body, I actually need the power of the earth." The invincible tyrant body was divided into 3 layers. Only by successfully cultivating all 3 layers could he activate the invincible tyrant body state. And to cultivate the first layer, he needed the power of the earth. The power of the earth. The Monarch hound was stunned and then said, "You can control the power of the earth?" Yi Xian nodded. "Absorb the power of the earth to strengthen my body." After saying that, he directly began. It didn't take long for the power of the earth to converge towards him. As the power of the earth grew, Yi Xian's body gradually started to change. Yi Xian's expression gradually became solemn, because he noticed that after he circulated the invincible tyrant body, his body actually started to devour the power of the earth. In other words, he wasn't using the power of the earth, but devouring it. Countless flowers and trees around him were withering at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Moreover, the pool beside him had dried up. Yi Xian looked at the Monarch hound. The Monarch hound fell silent for a while and then said, "Cultivation is about seizing the fortune of the world. When a cultivator starts to cultivate, he or she is fighting against the heavens and all living things. If you don't fight, you will die. Cultivation is about going against the heavens." Yi Xian was silent where he was. Cultivation was about going against the heavens. He'd heard this countless times. As the Monarch Hound had said, humans were fighting against the heavens from the moment they started cultivating. If you don't fight, you will die. After a while, Yi Xian took a deep breath. He looked up at the horizon and said softly, "Going against the heavens?" As he spoke, he continued to absorb the power of the earth around him. Mercy? Yi Xian would not pretend to be merciful. Because absorbing spiritual energy was also destroying the world. If he really wanted to be merciful, then he shouldn't even absorb spiritual energy. He only knew that if he was weak he would be beaten. So, he had to become stronger. P.S. Asking for votes. Am I too thick-skinned? Chapter 5:12. Around him, endless power of the earth flowed into his body. After devouring this power of the earth, his body began to tremble violently. The Emperor Hound's expression was grave. Yi Xian devouring the power of the earth was dangerous. Devouring was different from using it. If he devoured, Yi Xian's body could not bear it and he might explode. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly stopped. As soon as he stopped, a powerful force swept out of his body. The Emperor Hound asked quickly, "How is it?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I don't dare to continue devouring." Devour. He devoured more and more power of the earth, to the point that his body could not bear it anymore. The Emperor Hound nodded. "Don't be too hasty." Yi Xian said softly, "Indeed." He realized that on the path of cultivation, one could not be too hasty. He had been too hasty just now. The Emperor Hound said, "Take your time." Yi Xian nodded, then looked up at the horizon and said softly, "To Shenwu City." The Emperor Hound nodded. "Yes, it is time to go to Shenwu City." Yi Xian smiled. "I wonder how they are? Let's go." After saying that, he jumped onto the Emperor Hound's back. The Emperor Hound soared into the sky and disappeared into the horizon. On the way, the Emperor Hound said, "Shenwu City is a place where monsters gather." Yi Xian nodded. "Emosia seems to have gone to Shenwu City too." Emosia. The Emperor Hound said, "If that guy also went, it will be lively there." Yi Xian smiled. "Indeed, I am looking forward to it." Shenwu City. And Lanxiu Lian Wanli Emosia Ling So many familiar people. Yi Xian laughed. "Brother Emperor, hurry up." The Emperor Hound leaped and disappeared into the horizon. Not long after Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound disappeared, a red figure suddenly appeared. The red figure looked at the Emperor Hound and Yi Xian in the distance and said softly, "Shenwu City? I am afraid you will not reach Shenwu City." Divine Martial City? That was a forbidden place. Once Yi Xian entered the Divine Martial City, even the Star Lord wouldn't dare to touch the Divine Martial City. Therefore, those who wanted Yi Xian's treasures would definitely make their move when Yi Xian entered the Divine Martial City. Because this might be their best chance to strike. In the same place, the Red Shadow said softly, "What a headache." When he saw Yi Xian kill that old man from the Order Gate, he was actually a little hesitant. He was hesitating whether or not he should continue targeting Yi Xian. Because Yi Xian was too monstrous. Moreover, Yi Xian's current strength was already a little overpowered, and there was a mysterious expert behind him. If things went wrong, not only would he not be able to obtain the treasure, he would even invite disaster upon himself. However, he was unwilling to give up just like that. Because of Yi Xian's treasure. Enter the fifth dimension. This was a temptation that no expert could resist. Rumor had it that after entering the fifth dimension, it would be a whole new world. One could break through one's bottleneck and live forever. As long as it was an old monster-level expert, no one could resist this temptation. Because this might be their last hope. After a while, the Red Shadow said softly, "We have to take a gamble. Otherwise, how would we be any different from a salted fish?" After saying that, he disappeared. One day later, on the Imperial starship in the boundless starry sky, Yi Xian looked at the distant starry sky and said softly, "We will enter the Divine Martial Star Field in half a day." Speaking of this, he seemed to have thought of something and frowned slightly. "Stop." With that, the Imperial starship stopped. The Emperor Hound looked at Yi Xian. "What is it?" Yi Xian said softly, "Brother D, enter the tower." The Emperor Hound said in a deep voice, "What is it?" Yi Xian looked around and said, "The Divine Martial City is not a simple place. If we enter the Divine Martial City, those who want to kill me will not dare to act recklessly. So, this might be their only chance." The Emperor Hound looked around. "You're saying that someone might be following us?" Yi Xian nodded. "It's not a possibility. It should be 100%. As he spoke, he glanced around. The The starry sky was silent, and there was no one there. However, he knew that someone was definitely hiding in the dark. The Emperor Hound nodded and entered the prison pagoda. Yi Xian put the Imperial starship away and vanished nearby. Yi Xian didn't go directly to the divine martial city. Instead, he wandered aimlessly through the boundless starry sky. An hour later, Yi Xian suddenly entered a dead planet. In midair, Yi Xian glanced around. The spirit energy on this planet had dried up, and it was a dead planet. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly, and then he transformed into a ray of light and vanished. Not long after Yi Xian vanished, a red shadow suddenly appeared. The red shadow glanced into the distance and said softly, "Did you notice?" At this point he suddenly turned around and looked. There's someone else. There was still someone else. The red shadow turned to look at the place where Yi Xian had disappeared and chuckled. What a cunning fellow. With that he disappeared on the spot. A moment later Yi Xian entered the boundless mountain range. He didn't use the dragon soul to enhance his divine sense. If he used the dragon soul, the other party might also discover him if he discovered the other party. If it was just one person he wouldn't mind. However, if there were many of them he would be forcing the other party to make a move. Not long after, Yi Xian's speed suddenly soared. At this moment he directly used the Tao of space to increase his speed to the extreme. In the blink of an eye, he used the chaotic qi to completely conceal himself. In the mountain range, Yi Xian sat quietly on a tree. Just like that, about an hour later, a black-clothed man suddenly appeared in the sky above his head. Yi Xian remained calm and focused, motionless. A moment later, the black-clothed man suddenly disappeared. Not long after the black-clothed man disappeared, an old man suddenly appeared. The old man remained silent for a long time before leaving. Yi Xian still didn't move. Not long after, a woman suddenly appeared not far in front of Yi Xian. The woman wore a thin black chiffon. Her figure was excellent, and her beautiful hair draped over her shoulders. As she had her back to Yi Xian couldn't see her face. The woman suddenly leaned against a tree. She just leaned against it, showing no intention of leaving. In the dark, Yi Xian's face sank. Just like this, the woman didn't show any intention of leaving until nightfall. A bright moon hung in the sky, and the land was quiet. At this moment, Yi Xian walked out from the dark. The woman chuckled. Finally willing to come out? With that, she turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the woman. The woman was wearing a black veil and only a pair of eyes could be seen. Yi Xian said indifferently, "You found me." The woman smiled without saying anything. Yi Xian shook his head. "No, you know I'm here, but you don't know my specific location." The woman smiled. Young Master Ye's concealment technique is indeed strong. Unfortunately, young Master Ye's realm is a little low. Otherwise, I'm afraid we wouldn't even be able to catch up to young Master Ye's shadow. Yi Xian walked in front of the woman. A straightforward person doesn't beat around the bush. Are you here for that treasure? The woman nodded. Yes. Not really. Yi Xian smiled. I'm a little interested. The woman looked at Yi Xian. I wonder if young Master Yi is interested in joining us? Yi Xian asked. Join you? The woman nodded. As long as young Master Yi agrees, we will ensure young Master Ye's safety. Yi Xian smiled. What faction are you from? The woman shook her head. Sorry, I can't say for now. Yi Xian thought for a moment. It shouldn't be that simple for me to join you, right? The woman smiled. There is a small condition. That is, young Master Yi must hand over one soul and one spirit. Of course, we can guarantee that we won't harm young Master Yi. Not only that, we will also nurture young Master Yi. Haha. Yi Xian suddenly laughed. The woman looked at Yi Xian. The smile on her face gradually disappeared. Right at this time, the woman's face fell and she slapped out fiercely. Rumble. This slap shattered the space in front of her. At the same time, she retreated frantically. At the moment she retreated, a sword slashed down at her nose. If she was just a little slower, her nose would have been cut in half. The veiled woman retreated until she was more than 300 meters away. As soon as she stopped, her expression changed again because two sword lights had appeared behind her. It was as if the two swords had been waiting for her. This sudden turn of events shocked the veiled woman. But she reacted extremely quickly. She spun around and pressed her palms together. She closed her palms together and the two swords instantly shattered. In her palms there were two swords. At the same time, the veiled woman turned around and charged forward. The space in her path collapsed inch by inch. Rumble. An explosion suddenly resounded in the distance, and then a figure was blasted flying. It was Yi Xian. In midair, Yi Xian's body was collapsing inch by inch. The veiled woman gazed coldly at Yi Xian. "You're still young." When she spoke up to hear, her expression changed abruptly. "No." As soon as she finished speaking, her throat split open. Everything in the surroundings suddenly returned to normal, and even the space that she'd shattered earlier had returned to normal at this moment. As to Yi Xian, whose body had been destroyed, he was still standing in front of her. The veiled woman looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. How could you?" Yi Xian did not speak. He took out a purple origin crystal and began to devour it. Dream. Just now he had used 3 layers of dream. However, the consumption of these 3 layers of dream was too great. It was so great that he almost could not hold on. In front of Yi Xian, the veiled woman stared at Yi Xian. "What did you do to me just now?" She originally wanted to abandon her body, but now she realized that she could not even move her soul. "What did I do?" Yi Xian looked at the woman and smiled. "Guess." The veiled woman stared at Yi Xian with some resentment. "You won't live for long. They won't let you go." Yi Xian raised his hand and swung his sword. The veiled woman's head flew into the air. Blood gushed out like a fountain. At this moment, the emperor dog suddenly said, "Boy, can't you show some mercy to the fairer sex?" Yi Xian said indifferently, "She's not my woman. Why should I show mercy to her?" After saying that, he took the veiled woman's storage ring and disappeared not far away. Emperor Dog. Chapter 513. In a certain cave, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, crazily absorbing the purple Genesis crystal. Casting the 3 dream realms previously consumed too much of his energy. With his current strength, he could only cast 4 dream realms at most. 4 dream realms, this was his current limit. Now he could easily kill a manifestation realm expert without the Divine King's sword or the Divine King's throne. The manifestation realm was no longer a threat to him. Of course, he did not dare to be careless. After all, there were strong and weak manifestation realm experts. About 2 hours later, Yi Xian's body had more or less recovered. He took out the veiled woman's storage ring, but when he scanned it with his divine sense, he was stunned. Apart from a black token, there was nothing else in the storage ring. He quietly headed to Divine Martial City. Divine Martial City? This time Yi Xian chose to quietly head to Divine Martial City. He was not afraid of those people in the dark, but he did not want to be entangled with them because they were not the main characters. He only wanted to see his sister Yi Ling and the others as soon as possible. One day later, Yi Xian finally entered the Divine Martial Star Field. Divine Martial Star Field. This star field was not big. In fact, it was very small. There was only one Divine Martial City. But this tiny Divine Martial City was an existence that many forces were extremely afraid of. Soon Yi Xian saw an ancient city in the starry sky. The city was very big and he could not see the end of it. In the sky above Divine Martial City, there were 2 huge statues. One was a woman with a spear and the other was a man with a sword. When he saw the man, Yi Xian was stunned. Why did he look so familiar? At this moment there was a sudden change. The space in front of him suddenly split open, and then a huge chessboard flashed out. In the next moment he was surrounded by 4 chess pieces, 2 black and 2 white. Yi Xian's face darkened. These people had discovered him. Right at this moment, an old man suddenly walked out from the rift in space. The old man was just about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot, and when he appeared once more, he was already in front of the old man. At the same time, there were 2 rays of light from the sword. Yi Xian was holding the soul-suppressing sword. This time he did not hold back at all. The old man was a little stunned because he did not expect Yi Xian to directly attack. It was this slight shock that allowed Yi Xian to seize the initiative. However, the old man's reaction was not slow either. He turned his right hand into a palm and pressed it down lightly. Boom! A powerful force swept out from his body, and this force forcefully stopped Yi Xian's 2 sword lights. Moreover, Yi Xian himself was even shaken to the point of retreating explosively. A wisp of a cold smile arose on the corners of the old man's mouth when he saw Yi Xian being blasted back. However, right at this moment, his pupils suddenly constricted to the size of needles. In the next moment, his head flew into the air. Behind the old man, Yi Xian held the soul-suppressing sword and slashed down. The space was directly torn apart by the soul-suppressing sword. In the next moment, he used the law of space to escape from the array formation. When he reappeared, he was already thousands of feet away. Then he headed straight for Divine Martial City. But soon, a spear suddenly pierced through the sky. Yi Xian stopped and raised his head to look at the spear. The spear was like a bolt of lightning, extremely dazzling. At this moment, a sword light suddenly slashed the spear. Boom. The spear was forcefully stopped by the sword light. At this moment, a middle-aged man appeared above Yi Xian's head. The middle-aged man held the spear and looked coldly at Yi Xian. You have underestimated. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly shot up into the sky. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes and stabbed down with his spear. Boom. The sword light shattered, and Yi Xian returned to his original position. Yi Xian lowered his head and looked at his arm. At this moment his sword-wielding hand had cracked. He raised his head and looked at the spear-wielding man in the air. As he had expected, it would be difficult for him to kill these people who were a few levels higher than him if he did not launch a sneak attack. In the sky, the man in the field looked at Yi Xian with vigilance. He didn't dare to be careless. From the moment Yi Xian instantly killed the old man, he had already treated Yi Xian as an opponent of the same level. Because his strength was not much different from the old man. The spear-wielding man looked down at Yi Xian. Leave that treasure and you can leave. Yi Xian thought for a moment. Then he said, Really? The man's eyes narrowed. Don't play tricks. Yi Xian shook his head. I won't play tricks. If I give it to you, will you really let me go? The man's face sank and he just stared at Yi Xian. His intuition told him that Yi Xian wouldn't hand over that treasure so easily. Yi Xian looked at the man. You don't want it? The spear-wielding man stared at Yi Xian. You'd better not play any tricks. Yi Xian nodded. I hope you keep your word. As soon as he finished speaking, an illusory Xiaota suddenly appeared between his brows. It didn't take long for the illusory Xiaota to leave the space between Yi Xian's brows. The man's gaze instantly burned with desire when he saw the illusory Xiaota. Meanwhile Yi Xian said, I'll give it to you. Farewell. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and fled. He was the real deal. The imperial hound within the pagoda was stunned. Because Yi Xian had really put down the pagoda and fled. What's going on? The man was quite stunned as well. He really fled. He didn't think too much about it. His figure shook as he charged towards the pagoda. Right at this moment, a few formidable auras suddenly appeared here. A moment later, a world-shaking explosion resounded, and then the man was blasted over 1 kilometer away. At the same time, an old man, 2 black-clothed men, and a red figure had suddenly appeared around the pagoda. The man's face instantly became ferocious when he witnessed this scene, and then he charged over. A battle. It didn't take long for a few experts to start fighting intensely around the pagoda. Meanwhile Yi Xian watched silently from a hidden spot. He was naturally not worried about the pagoda because he'd noticed that it was actually extremely terrifying. He'd shown some of its power in the ancient devil clan, and it was absolutely not something that a creation realm expert could resist. Moreover, if the pagoda really left, then it was a good thing for him as well. Because he didn't rely on the pagoda right now. Conversely, he had to be on tenterhooks at all times because of the pagoda, and he was deeply afraid that the 6th floor would escape at any moment. He'd rather face his enemies outside than face those fellows within the pagoda. Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and looked towards the distance. A few experts were engaged in a frenzied battle. Needless to say, all of them were extremely strong. If it was a sneak attack, then he was confident in his ability to instantly kill them. But if it was a head-on battle, then he didn't have much of a chance at victory. It couldn't be helped because their cultivations were much higher than his. Right at this moment, the man with the spear was blasted flying, and he flew over 3 kilometers away. At the same time, his entire left arm had vanished. The man's face was extremely unsightly. He glanced at the others in the distance, hesitated for a moment, and then chose to leave in the end. He'd lost the right to fight for the precious treasure. It didn't take long for the man to vanish into the distance. He suddenly stopped around 15 minutes later, and then a ray of light shot through the center of his forehead. The man's eyes opened wide as he stared fixedly ahead. You. Behind the spear-wielding man, Yi Xian put away his sword, and then put away the spear-wielding man's storage ring. Then he shook his body and directly disappeared not far away. Yi Xian returned to the battlefield. The pagoda was still there. And the pagoda was still there. A smile appeared on Yi Xian's face as he watched them fight, and then he just watched silently. Not long after, another person retreated from the battlefield, and then Yi Xian vanished as well. He didn't move immediately because if he did, those people would definitely join forces to deal with him first. Therefore, he waited until the person who retreated was far away before he made his move. 1 strike to kill. The soul-suppressing sword combined with the Dream Dao Law and the Space Dao Law. The opponent's soul didn't even have a chance to escape. Now, only 3 people were left fighting for the pagoda. An old man, a red figure, and a woman in a black robe. What surprised Yi Xian was that the woman was a swordsman, and a powerful swordsman at that. Among the three, the old man was the weakest. At this moment, the female swordsman and the red figure suddenly joined forces. The old man's expression changed greatly and he wanted to flee, but the woman in black robe's sword was faster and blocked him. Soon, only the red figure and the female swordsman were left beside the pagoda. The two of them didn't start fighting and they just stood there. At this moment, the red figure suddenly said, "Come out. Come out." In the dark, Yi Xian frowned slightly. Did the other party notice him? In the distance, the red figure suddenly turned to look at Yi Xian. Seeing this, Yi Xian knew that the other party had really noticed him. Yi Xian didn't hide anymore. He walked out and grinned. "Hello, you two." The female swordsman coldly looked at Yi Xian and didn't say a word. Yi Xian also sized up the female swordsman. He had to admit that this female swordsman was very beautiful, but her eyes were too cold, not gentle at all. The red figure lightly smiled and said, "Are you trying to reap the benefits of a fisherman?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I've already taken out the pagoda. As long as the two of you have the strength, you can take it away at any time." The red figure smiled and said, "The two of us will fight to the death and then you can deal with us?" Yi Xian quietly sighed. "It seems that you two are prepared to join forces to kill me first." The female swordsman coldly looked at Yi Xian. The sword in her hand trembled as if it wanted to be unsheathed. The red figure suddenly said, "Yi Xian, we know that you're not simple. We just want to take this treasure, not to kill you. As long as you give up this treasure, we won't trouble you." Yi Xian smiled and said, "All right, I'll leave now." After saying that, he turned around and left. At this time, the female swordsman suddenly stood in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian turned around and looked at the red figure. "What else do you want? Are you going to let me live?" The red figure was silent for a moment and then said, "You're too treacherous, I really don't trust you, so it's better to get rid of you." After saying that, he directly rushed toward Yi Xian. Behind Yi Xian, the female swordsman suddenly unsheathed her sword. She was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye she arrived in front of Yi Xian, and then stabbed at Yi Xian's back. When she arrived behind Yi Xian suddenly turned around. Yi Xian did not dodge and let the sword stab into his abdomen. The woman was stunned. In the next moment, the woman's throat suddenly split open, and Yi Xian appeared behind her. The woman's eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief. Yi Xian turned around to look at the red figure, but at this time the red figure had stopped. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Why did you stop?" The red figure was silent for a moment, then said, "I didn't know you were so strong, sorry to disturb you." After saying that, he turned around and left. Yi Xian. P.S. I've been watching some TV series recently, all kinds of remakes, it's making me feel awkward. So, I went back to watching TV series from more than 10 years ago like Justice Bao. Why do I feel that the TV series from more than 10 years ago are so much better? Chapter 5:14. The red shadow moved extremely fast, disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Yi Xian did not chase after it because he could not catch up. For an expert of this level, if the other party did not fight him, he could not do anything to them. Yi Xian gave up on the red shadow and looked at the swordsman woman in front of him. He had to admit that this woman died in a rather sullen manner. Devour. Now that he had the soul-suppressing sword as his dantian, he could directly devour any sword that was of a lower level than the soul-suppressing sword. And this swordsman woman's sword was obviously not of a higher level than the soul-suppressing sword. Yi Xian took the woman's storage ring and looked at the world prison pagoda not far in front of him. At this time, the world prison pagoda turned into a black light and flew into his body. Yi Xian was speechless. This world prison pagoda did not want to leave him. It was already relying on him. Yi Xian shook his head and disappeared. Not long after Yi Xian left, the red figure from before showed up in the field again. Looking at Yi Xian leaving in the distance, the red shadow was silent. After a long time, the red shadow said softly, "Divine Martial City." Divine Martial City? Yi Xian came to the gate of Divine Martial City and looked up into the sky. In the sky he saw two statues. A man and a woman. The woman was holding a spear and had a long ponytail, while the man was wearing a green robe and had a sword at his waist. The sword was somewhat familiar. Yi Xian felt that he had seen this sword somewhere before. And at this time, a powerful pressure suddenly came from behind him. Yi Xian was shocked and quickly turned around. Not far in front of him, a black dragon swooped down from the sky. And on the dragon sat a man in embroidered robes. The black dragon swooped down without the slightest intention of stopping, and Yi Xian also had no intention of leaving. At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The middle-aged man punched upwards. Rumble. The huge dragon was forced to stop in the air. The enormous dragon was instantly infuriated, and it roared at the middle-aged man. Moreover, it was about to swoop down once more. Meanwhile, the man in embroidered clothes suddenly patted the enormous dragon lightly, and the latter instantly stopped. However, it still glared angrily at the middle-aged man below. The man in embroidered clothes flew down from the dragon and walked in front of the middle-aged man. He smiled and said, "Why did you attack me?" The middle-aged man looked at the man in embroidered robes. "This is the divine martial city." The man in embroidered clothes spread his hands and said innocently, "I didn't do anything." The middle-aged man walked to the front of the man in embroidered clothes and said softly, "On account of your father, I'll give you a piece of advice. Keep a low profile." With that, he turned around and left. Behind the middle-aged man, the man in embroidered robes laughed. "Low profile? I also want to keep a low profile. It's a pity that my strength doesn't allow it." As he spoke, he looked towards the divine martial city. "Divine martial city, I Xingqian am here. Tremble." At the side, Yi Xian shook his head and turned to walk towards the divine martial city. At this moment, the man in embroidered clothes called Xingqian suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Looking at Yi Xian, the corners of Xingqian's mouth curled up. "Weren't you afraid just now?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and then he said, "Very afraid." Xingqian's eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you run if you were afraid?" Yi Xian said, "I was too nervous and forgot." Xingqian was stunned and then he laughed. He patted Yi Xian's shoulder. "I'm still lacking an underling. You can be my underling." Yi Xian was speechless. Xingqian said indifferently, "What? You're not willing?" Yi Xian shook his head. Are there any benefits?" "Benefits?" Xingqian sized up Yi Xian. "I'll take you as my underling." "You want benefits from being my underling?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Of course. Wouldn't it be too shameful if there are no benefits? Also, you don't have any prestige." Xingqian thought for a moment and then he said, "What you said makes sense. What benefits do you want?" Yi Xian said, "Big brother, just give it to me as you see fit." Xingqian pointed with his finger, and a storage ring landed in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at it. There were 1,000,000 purple origin crystals in the storage ring. He had to say that this was very generous. Xingqian patted Yi Xian's shoulder and laughed. "From now on, you are my underling. If you are bullied in Divine Martial City in the future, just say my name." With that, he turned and flew into Divine Martial City. In the same spot, Yi Xian nodded. "I will definitely say your name." With that, he also entered Divine Martial City. Divine Martial City was very prosperous, and Yi Xian discovered that there were many swordsmen here. There were many swordsmen out of every 10 people on the streets, and they were all very strong. Yi Xian was suddenly curious about the sword sect. After asking around, Yi Xian walked towards the sword sect. Not long after, Yi Xian arrived at the foot of the sword sect's mountain. There were many people coming and going at the foot of the sword sect's mountain, and they were all swordsmen. Sword Dao. All these years he had been developing his sword Dao on his own, and he rarely received pointers from others. Therefore he was very much looking forward to joining a swordsman sect. If there was someone to guide him, he would definitely be able to avoid many detours on the path of the sword. Yi Xian walked up the mountain. When he came to the stone steps below the giant sword, an old man with a long sword on his back stopped him. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. "Do you want to join my sword sect?" Yi Xian nodded. The old man pointed to the right. "If you want to join my sword sect, you must first pass the trial." Yi Xian looked to the right. A few dozen feet away there was a huge round platform. A young swordsman was standing on top of the round platform, and he seemed to be testing something. Yi Xian nodded and came to the bottom of the round platform. He looked up and saw that the young swordsman was fighting with a wooden puppet. Seeing this wooden puppet, Yi Xian was stunned. Because this wooden puppet was exactly the same as the wooden puppet in his world prison pagoda. However, other than the same appearance, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. The wooden puppet in his body, he was no match for it in a head-on fight. At this moment, the young man on the round platform suddenly retreated. When he reached the edge of the round platform, he turned around and slashed at the wooden puppet's waist at a strange angle. Bang! The wooden puppet retreated again and again. At this time, an old man on the platform glanced at the young man. "Pass." The young man's expression relaxed and he couldn't help but smile. He bowed to the old man and left. Seeing this, many people had a trace of envy in their eyes. The sword sect. This was the strongest swordsman sect. As long as one joined it, not only would they have cultivation resources, they would also have a powerful backer. In this world where the strong were respected, a backer was very important. Soon, one swordsman after another went up the platform. Some failed, some succeeded. About an hour later, Yi Xian walked up the round platform. The old man next to him glanced at Yi Xian. "Shall we begin?" Yi Xian nodded. Yi Xian had just nodded when the wooden puppet in front of him suddenly charged at him. However, everyone was stunned in the next moment. Because a sword had suddenly been pressed against the wooden puppet's forehead. Everyone looked at Yi Xian one after another. At this moment, the old man's expression had become slightly solemn. Because he actually hadn't been able to see how Yi Xian had attacked just now. Damn. What a swift sword. Yi Xian gestured with his right hand, and the sword flew back to him. After that, he gazed at the old man. The old man remained silent for a moment before he said, "Come with me." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Yi Xian followed him. Everyone in the surroundings looked at each other. High profile. Yi Xian hadn't intended to conceal his strength when he came to the sword sect this time. Because he was very well aware that it wouldn't be long before the higher-ups of the sword sect would find out about him. Moreover, he was very well aware that the stronger he revealed his strength, the more attention the sword sect would place on him. It didn't take long for the old man to lead Yi Xian to a hall, and then the old man bowed slightly. A short moment later, a voice resounded from within the hall. "Come in." The old man gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian nodded slightly and walked in. The hall was very spacious and there was only a single middle-aged man here. The middle-aged man sized up Yi Xian. He said that you're very outstanding. Prove it to me. Yi Xian nodded and then he looked up at the middle-aged man. A moment later, two flying swords silently appeared on both sides of the middle-aged man. Meanwhile, a sword suddenly appeared in the middle-aged man's hand, and then he swung it to his left and right, causing Yi Xian's swords to be blasted flying. But right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of the middle-aged man, and then he suddenly slashed his sword down towards the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man raised his sword to block. Bang! As soon as Yi Xian's sword slashed down, the middle-aged man instantly retreated explosively, but he quickly stopped himself. As soon as he did, two flying swords suddenly appeared behind him. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly, and then he turned around and shot out a wave of swords. Bang! Both of Yi Xian's flying swords were blasted flying. On the other hand, Yi Xian didn't attack again. If he continued, then the middle-aged man would lose. He wanted to prove himself to the sword sect, and he didn't want to offend them. The middle-aged man sheathed his swords, and then he gazed at Yi Xian with a trace of seriousness in his eyes. "Your flying swords are really swift." Yi Xian bowed slightly. "Thank you for your compliment, senior." Seeing Yi Xian's bow, the middle-aged man secretly nodded in his heart, and then his eyes became slightly softer. "You're very strong and I have nothing to teach you." Speaking until here, he slightly paused. "Come with me." After saying that, he walked out of the hall. Yi Xian hurried to follow him. The middle-aged man brought Yi Xian to the peak of a mountain behind the sect. At the peak of the mountain, there was a thatched hut, and in front of the hut was a vegetable garden. In the garden, an old man was planting vegetables. An expert. This was Yi Xian's first impression of the old man when he saw him. Anyone who sweeps and grows vegetables like this must be a peerless expert. The middle-aged man brought Yi Xian to the old man, and the middle-aged man bowed slightly. "Old Two, is young Martial Uncle here?" The old man put down the things in his hand and then shook his head. "I don't know where he went." "Why, is there something?" The middle-aged man nodded and he glanced at Yi Xian. "A young lad appeared and he's not bad. I want to recommend him to young Martial Uncle." Old Two looked at Yi Xian and then he sized up Yi Xian. "Let him wait here." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Then he looked at Yi Xian. "Wait here for a moment. Junior Master swordsmanship is unparalleled. If you can become his disciple, it will be very beneficial for your swordsmanship to improve." Yi Xian nodded. "All right." The middle-aged man turned and left. Yi Xian walked to Old Two. "Greetings, senior." Old Two said indifferently, "Don't flatter me, I'm just an ordinary vegetable farmer." Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 515. A vegetable farmer? Yi Xian definitely did not believe it. This kind of old man was usually a peerless expert. Yi Xian chuckled. "Senior, is that junior Martial Uncle powerful?" The old man glanced at Yi Xian. "Don't worry, he is definitely stronger than you." Yi Xian said indifferently, really? The old man sized up Yi Xian. Young man, you are so arrogant. Yi Xian shook his head. No. I just want to become stronger. It was not that he was arrogant, but his sword attainment had reached a bottleneck. It was very difficult to improve further. It was the same for sword skills. What he desired now was to know his own shortcomings. The old man put down the things in his hand and looked at Yi Xian. You think you are very strong now? Yi Xian looked at the old man. Senior, please enlighten me. The old man shook his head. I am just a vegetable farmer. With that, he continued to grow vegetables. Yi Xian did not insist and walked to the side. Wait. He now hoped that junior martial uncle was strong enough. In terms of realm, he did not want to improve for now because he had not fully digested this realm. He only wanted to improve his sword path. In other words, he wanted to see other sword path experts. The stronger the better. Of course, he could not be as strong as the plain-dressed woman. Not long after, a woman appeared in front of Yi Xian. The person was Lian Wanli. After entering Xinwu City, he took the initiative to contact Lian Wanli and the others. Lian Wanli sized up Yi Xian. You've become stronger? Yi Xian smiled. He looked behind Lian Wanli and asked, where are they? Lian Wanli's lips curled up. Is it not enough for me? Yi Xian smiled and changed the topic. Miss Lian, you have been in Xinwu City for some time. How do you feel? Lian Wanli's smile gradually disappeared. Yi Xian asked softly, what's wrong? Lian Wanli smiled. There are many monsters in this place. A lot? Yi Xian was startled for a moment before he smiled and said, isn't that good? Lian Wanli said softly, only now does this king truly understand what it means by there is always someone better out there. Yi Xian nodded. In the past, he felt that he had few opponents in the younger generation. However, after encountering Wuxia, he discovered that there were people in the younger generation that weren't any weaker than him. The monstrous geniuses of the divine martial city were definitely not weaker than him and Wuxia. Of course, this was a good thing for him. True experts were never afraid of their opponents being strong. What they were afraid of was their opponents not being strong enough. Just like at this moment, if someone of the same age defeated him in the sword Dao, then he would be happy instead. As long as he was not defeated, he would not know his own shortcomings. At this moment, Lian Wanli suddenly said, this king is going to fight. With that, she turned around and left. At this moment, Yi Xian hurriedly asked, where are Ling Er and the rest? Lian Wanli didn't even turn his head. They are busy and can't come for the time being. When you're done here, come to Wuyuan to find them. As her voice faded, she had already disappeared at the end of the horizon. Wuyuan. Yi Xian nodded slightly. At this moment, the old man not far away suddenly said, now that you have joined the sword sect, it's best that you don't go to Wuyuan. Yi Xian looked at the old man puzzled. Why? The old man said lightly, if you go to Wuyuan you will be beaten. Yi Xian slightly frowned. This sword sect and Wuyuan are enemies? The old man shook his head. Not exactly enemies, but there is competition. Many years ago it was a healthy competition, but gradually, it has changed. In any case, those people from Jiahe Street and Wuyuan feel that swordsman is not as good as them, while we feel that they are not as good as our swordsmen. Both sides have a competition every year, and gradually the relationship between both sides is getting worse. Yi Xian's face darkened. Ling Er and Lanxiu and Lian Wanli are in Wuyuan, and Lian Wanli is in Wuyuan. Should I go to Wuyuan? As if knowing what Yi Xian was thinking, the old man suddenly said, kid, don't tell me you want to go to Wuyuan? Yi Xian thought for a while, then nodded. My sister is in Wuyuan, and so are my friends in Wuyuan. Speaking of this, he decided to go to Wuyuan. He did not want to have a hostile relationship with his sister and Lanxiu and the others in the future. What sword or not, his sister is the boss. Thinking of this, Yi Xian turned around and left. To Wuyuan. At this moment, the old man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian was shocked. This old man is so fast. The old man stared at Yi Xian. You're a member of the sword sect now. Yi Xian said, Senior, I haven't joined the sword sect yet, right? The old man suddenly slapped Yi Xian's shoulder, and a small black mark appeared on his shoulder. Sword. The old man said indifferently, you are now. Yi Xian's face darkened. Senior, are you forcing me to join? The old man said coldly, what? Is it wrong for you to join my sword sect? Yi Xian said, that's not it. It's just that my sister is in Wuyuan, so I want to go to Wuyuan. I hope Senior can fulfill my wish. The old man shook his head. You're a member of my sword sect now. If you go to Wuyuan, then not only will they not accept you, they will look down on you instead. Think about it. Yi Xian was speechless. Meanwhile the old man said, "Don't worry. The sword sect won't treat you unfairly." Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings and said, "Senior, I'm afraid you won't be able to stop me if I want to leave." The old man spoke indifferently, "Is that so?" Yi Xian smiled and then he vanished in the next moment. At the instant that Yi Xian vanished, the old man kicked lightly with his right foot, and a branch in front of him suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot forward. Over 1 kilometer away. Bang! A rumbling sound suddenly rang out. Then a figure fell from the sky. It was Yi Xian. Yi Xian turned around to look at the old man. The old man took a step forward, and he'd arrived in front of Yi Xian as soon as his foot descended. Yi Xian's expression instantly became solemn when he witnessed this scene. This old man really isn't an ordinary person. The old man sized up Yi Xian. "Shall we attack?" Yi Xian nodded, and then 2 rays of light slashed down towards the old man. However, the rays of light had just arrived in front of the old man when they stopped because the old man's fingers had clamped down on them. Yi Xian's heart shook because the old man was much stronger than he'd imagined. The old man clamped down lightly, and the rays of light collapsed into pieces. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Senior, you're so strong." The old man spoke indifferently, "Come on, continue." Yi Xian shook his head, "I can't defeat you." The old man's strength was definitely superior to the wooden figure within his body. The old man was able to clamp down on his flying swords with his fingers. Such strength was enough to crush him. The old man glanced coldly at Yi Xian. "Young man, you're acting arrogant just because you have some strength. You don't know your own limits." Yi Xian nodded repeatedly, Yes, you're always right." The old man sneered, "Look at you. You're not convinced?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "I'm not really convinced." The old man was so angry that he started laughing. "Come, this time the old man will let you use one hand. If you can make the old man take half a step back, then the old man will recognize you as his master." Half a step. Yi Xian suddenly slashed forward. The old man laughed coldly and flicked his sleeve. With this swing, Yi Xian's ray of light instantly collapsed. But right at this moment, 2 rays of light suddenly appeared on the left and right of the old man. The old man was expressionless as he waved his right hand, and in the blink of an eye, those 2 rays of light collapsed. He looked at Yi Xian and was about to speak when his expression suddenly changed. Illusion. As soon as he finished speaking, he stomped his right foot lightly, and an expanse of rays of light surged out from beneath his feet. Bang! An explosion suddenly resounded here, and then a ray of light collapsed soundlessly in front of him. The old man gazed at Yi Xian, and he was about to speak when his expression changed once more. "It's an illusion again." As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his fingers together and flicked them lightly. The space in front of him was directly torn apart, but in an instant the space was restored. The old man glanced at the surroundings and frowned slightly. "It's an illusion again." As he spoke, he took a step back, and then a ray of light silently arrived before him. The old man raised his palm and smashed it down. Rumble. The space in the surroundings suddenly collapsed into pieces. But it instantly returned to normal. The old man raised his head to gaze at Yi Xian. At this moment, a wisp of blood was slowly seeping out from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. Yi Xian had an extremely solemn expression on his face. The old man had dealt with all 3 levels of the illusion. The old man stared at Yi Xian. "You've combined an illusion with the sword Dao." Yi Xian spoke solemnly, "Senior, how did you notice that it was a 3-level illusion?" The old man spoke coldly, "As a swordsman, how could an old man be considered a swordsman if he was bewitched by an illusion?" "A swordsman." Yi Xian laughed bitterly. "Indeed, a swordsman who'd attained the enlightened state of mind were innately able to counter illusions." "Wait." Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something and he gazed at the old man. "Senior, tell me the truth. How many people in the sword sect can disregard my illusions?" The old man fell silent for a moment before he said, "No more than 4. No more than 4. Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. If even a swordsman could deal with the illusion, then wouldn't the Tao of Dreams be too degrading? The old man sized up Yi Xian, "Your flying sword coupled with your illusion." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Isn't it very powerful?" The old man's face remained expressionless. "Very bad." Yi Xian's face froze. The old man spoke coldly, "You're not convinced?" Yi Xian nodded, "I'm not convinced." The old man said, "Do you know where you're lacking?" Yi Xian shook his head. The old man said, "It's your sword." Yi Xian spoke solemnly, "Please enlighten me, senior." The old man walked over to Yi Xian. the strength and speed of your sword have practically reached your current limits. I have to say it's very surprising. However, you've placed too much emphasis on strength and speed, and you've neglected something important. Yi Xian asked, "What is it?" The old man spoke softly, "Intent." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. "My speed and strength might not necessarily be faster than yours, but my intent is far above yours. So, no matter how strong your speed and strength are, they're not much of a threat to me. Unless you've reached that kind of absolute strength, and this also requires the support of intent." Yi Xian fell silent for a moment and then he said, "Please enlighten me, senior." The old man nodded slightly and he pointed to the vegetable garden in the distance. "Go and plant the old man's vegetables first." Yi Xian turned around and left. Looking at Yi Xian's back, the old man's expression relaxed and he muttered in his heart, "Fortunately, I fooled this guy. P.S. I'm going to spend my own money to print a few physical books about the invincible sword domain and the only sword. Is anyone interested in this? Chapter 5:16. Grow vegetables. Yi Xian really started to grow vegetables. Excitement. At this moment, Yi Xian was very excited because he finally knew where he was lacking. Power. Speed. He had indeed reached his current limit in these two aspects. However, as the old man had said, he was still a beginner in the aspect of intent. On the other side, the old man glanced at Yi Xian, feeling a little shocked. Yi Xian's strength was a little beyond his expectations. Especially with that illusion and Yi Xian's flying sword, he could almost instantly kill a manifestation realm cultivator. If he used it for a sneak attack, the effect would be even better. He was a good seedling. The old man nodded inwardly. The only thing that dissatisfied him was Yi Xian's character. He was too stubborn and a little slippery. This was not a bad thing for Sword Dao, but it was not a good thing for the Sword Sect. Trouble. From the first time he saw Yi Xian, he knew that this was definitely a troublemaker. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Senior, I have a problem." The old man looked at Yi Xian. "What problem?" Yi Xian said seriously, "You just took a step back." The old man, Yi Xian was about to speak when the old man suddenly said, "What? Do you have a problem? If you have a problem, let's continue to fight. The kind where life and death are decided." Yi Xian was dumbfounded. This old man was too shameless. Ah! At this moment, inside the World Prison Pagoda, the Emperor Dog suddenly laughed. "Finally, there's someone more shameless than you. Yi Xian." The old man walked in front of Yi Xian. "Do you have any more problems?" Yi Xian hurriedly shook his head. No problem." The old man snorted coldly. "Then what are you waiting for?" Yi Xian asked. "After I'm done, can Senior teach me?" The old man said angrily, "What's with all this nonsense? Hurry up." Yi Xian quickly nodded. Okay. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and hesitated. The old man frowned. "What's wrong with you now?" Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. "Senior, there's something you don't know. Actually, the true reason I wanted to leave the Sword Sect earlier was because I had some enemies before I came here. They coveted the treasures in my possession. I was afraid I'd implicate the Sword Sect." "Enemy?" The old man sized up Yi Xian. "I think it's normal for you to have enemies, but you can't even deal with those enemies?" Yi Xian nodded. "I can't. They have too many people. I can't beat them." The old man said coldly, "Don't worry, you're in the Sword Sect now and you're with me. No matter who your enemies are, this old man will block them for you." Yi Xian sighed again. "Senior, you may not know this, but my enemies are all very powerful." "Senior, the old man said angrily. "Old man said I will block them for you, so I will. Why are you acting like a woman?" Yi Xian quickly said, Okay, I will block them for you." After saying that, he began to plant vegetables. Needless to say, he was quite good at growing vegetables because he had done all kinds of chores in the Yi family. The old man glanced at Yi Xian and said, "In this all-heaven starfield, when has our sword sect been afraid of anyone? If your enemies are smart, they'd better not come to Divine Martial City. If they dare to come, old man will crush them with one hand." Yi Xian quickly said, Yes, Senior can crush them with one hand." The old man said, "Plant vegetables well, old man will go out for a while." After saying that, he turned around and left. After the old man left, Yi Xian sat on the ground. "Brother the Archhound, how strong was that old man?" The Archhound was silent. "This chapter is not over. Please continue." After a while, he said softly, "Unfathomable. Unfathomable." Yi Xian nodded slightly. The old man could catch his flying sword with his fingers. His strength could only be described as terrifying. Yi Xian looked around. He had to admit that the sword sect was indeed full of hidden talents. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian's face gradually darkened. Planet Lord. He was the mastermind behind the attack on the never-ending starfield. The Planet Lord would definitely not let him go. Some of the people who came to kill him must have been sent by the Planet Lord. Become stronger. This time he did not want to be passive anymore. At this moment, the old man who had left earlier returned. The old man flicked his finger and a token landed in front of Yi Xian. From now on, you are officially a disciple of the sword sect. Yi Xian. The old man sat on a wooden stool in front of Yi Xian. There is competition within the sect, but only healthy competition is allowed. If you are strong, you can even be the sect master. Saying that, he looked at Yi Xian. Remember, if a sect is not united, it will not be long before it is destroyed. You are a disciple of the sword sect now. You have the responsibility to maintain the unity of the sword sect, understand? Yi Xian shook his head. As long as others do not target me, I promise I will not cause trouble. Of course, if anyone wants me dead or plays dirty, I will definitely kill them. The old man looked at Yi Xian, but Yi Xian was not afraid. Return good for evil? No. Yi Xian likes to return good for good and evil for evil. The old man shook his head. You have a vicious aura and it is not a good thing for you. Yi Xian was silent. The old man continued, besides that, your sword has a fatal weakness. Yi Xian said, please enlighten me, senior. The old man said, the sword is indeed about speed and power. In this aspect, you can be said to be one of the best among the younger generation of the sword sect. However, the sword is not only about speed and power. Your current speed and power belong to the form style sect. Form style? Yi Xian frowned. What do you mean? The old man said, above the manifestation realm are the Tao realm experts. The so-called Tao realm experts are those who comprehend the Tao. As for the Tao, I can't explain it to you clearly. At this point, he paused for a moment before continuing. In this starfield, the experts are divided into 3 types. The first is the consciousness style, the second is the realm style, and the third is the form style. Yi Xian asked, form style? What do you mean? The old man looked at Yi Xian. Right now, you belong to the formality style because you focus on strength and speed. However, your strength and speed have only reached your own limit, not the limit of this world. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, in other words, I can be faster, right? The old man nodded. However, it will be very difficult for you to improve further. Yi Xian bowed respectfully. Senior, please teach me. The old man was silent for a moment before continuing, you want to focus on the form style? Yi Xian shook his head. I want to learn the consciousness style. The old man looked at Yi Xian. You are very ambitious. However, if you focus on form style, you will be at a disadvantage when you encounter the consciousness style. Yi Xian asked, Senior, which of these 3 styles is stronger? The old man shook his head. It depends on the person. Let's go. I will take you to see an old man. After saying that, he stood up. However, as if he thought of something, he looked at Yi Xian. Kid, I don't know much about your character, but the old man thinks that you are a good seedling and worth cultivating. However, I don't want the old man to cultivate a scourge for the sword sect. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian smiled. Senior, I have killed a lot of people, but I never take the initiative to kill people. Of course, I know what you are worried about. How about this? I promise that I will not compete for the sword sect's sect leader's position. The old man said angrily, if you have the strength, why don't you compete? This chapter is not finished. Please continue. Are you going to let those good-for-nothings take the position? Yi Xian, the old man sighed in a low voice. Kid, it is not that the old man is being unreasonable. The main thing is that many times, a sect often perishes because of internal strife. Kid, you are talented. If you mess around in the sword sect in the future. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, I won't mess around. Really? The old man shook his head. The more you say that, the more I panic. Yi Xian, the old man said, let's go. I will take you to see a real superform style expert. After saying that, he turned and disappeared not far away. Yi Xian hurriedly followed. On the way, the Emperor Hound in the prison pagoda suddenly said, Kid, you will definitely mess around. Yi Xian's face darkened. Brother Emperor Hound, what do you mean? The Monarch Hound said, Kid, think about it. Have you been messing around everywhere you go? Yi Xian. Soon the old man brought Yi Xian to a blacksmith's forge in Divine Martial City. In front of the blacksmith's forge, a burly man was madly hammering the weapon in his hand. Seeing the old man, the burly man sneered. Yo, what wind blew you here? The old man walked to the front of the blacksmith's forge, then looked at Yi Xian. Apprentice? Yi Xian was taken aback. Then he hurriedly bowed to the burly man. Disciple Yi Xian greets master. The burly man was dumbfounded. At this time the old man said, Blacksmith Chen, don't say this old man is not sincere. This time I found a good seedling, so I specially brought him for you to take a look. He is really good, absolutely a rare sight. Yi Xian, Blacksmith Chen glanced at the old man. Old lunatic, when did your skin become so thick? The old man said in a deep voice, Old Chen, I know you will be leaving soon. Don't you want to leave your life's work here? Blacksmith Chen shook his head. No. Saying so, he continued to forge. The old man said coldly, Let's go. Saying so, he turned and left. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then hurriedly followed. At this time the old man stopped and turned to Blacksmith Chen. Hit him. Yi Xian was stunned. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Hit him. Hit him to death. Without any hesitation, Yi Xian turned his head to look at Blacksmith Chen. In the next moment, 2 flying swords suddenly appeared in front of Blacksmith Chen. However, the 2 flying swords disappeared without a trace as soon as they arrived in front of the blacksmith. At the same time, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He drew his sword and slashed. The sword slashed down, cutting through the air. In the distance, a strand of hair appeared in the blacksmith's hand. The blacksmith glanced at Yi Xian and let go of his fingers. The strand of hair slowly fell. Yi Xian was silent. At this time, the blacksmith's expression suddenly changed. He didn't make a move, but the surrounding space suddenly collapsed. However, it returned to normal in an instant. At this time, a sword was pressed a few inches between the blacksmith's eyebrows. The sword couldn't move even half a step forward, because the blacksmith's fingers had caught Yi Xian's sword. At this moment, the blacksmith sized up Yi Xian seriously. The combination of illusion and swordsmanship. Saying so, he shook his head. I won't accept you because I've already met someone better than you. Saying so, he turned and continued to forge. The old man gave Yi Xian a look. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Senior, let's go. The old man looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. I desire to become stronger, but I will never beg others. Saying so, he glanced at the blacksmith not far away. Give me 1 year, and I will definitely not be worse than anyone. End of this chapter. Chapter 517. Beg. Yi Xian wanted to become stronger, but as he said, he would not beg the other party. No matter how strong the other party was, he would not beg the other party. Compared to becoming stronger, he felt that dignity was more important. If the other party thought highly of him, then it was naturally good, and he would respect the other party. But if the other party did not think highly of him, then it was fine. In the end, people still had to rely on themselves. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the old man's eyes flashed with admiration. Let's go. Then he turned and left. Yi Xian followed. The two left in a carefree manner. Not far away, the blacksmith glanced at Yi Xian and the old man, but did not say anything. At this moment, a young man walked over. The young man looked at Yi Xian and the old man. Master, they are? The blacksmith said in a deep voice. Remember that young man, he might be your greatest opponent. Hearing this, the young man was stunned, then turned to look into the distance. Yi Xian followed the old man back to the sword sect. On the peak of the mountain, the old man sat opposite Yi Xian. That person just now is called Blacksmith Chen. He is one of the top masters of formality in this divine martial arts city. No, I should say this star field. He is only in the rebirth state, but his speed and strength far surpass some Dao state experts. Even I am far inferior to him in terms of strength and speed. Saying this, he looked at Yi Xian. If you learn from him, you will definitely benefit greatly. Yi Xian smiled. It's okay, then I will first learn the flow of consciousness from Senior. The old man nodded. You did not use your full strength when you fought with me, right? Yi Xian nodded. The old man said, How much did you keep? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, 50%. Whether it was against the old man or Blacksmith Chen, he did not use his full strength. After all, he still had the Divine King's throne, soul-suppressing sword, and Divine King's sword that he had not used. If it was a battle of life and death, he would have a fighting chance if he used these 3 treasures. The old man took a deep look at Yi Xian. Boy, you're not an ordinary person. This old man doesn't want to investigate your background. All you need to know is that you're a disciple of the sword sect. Yi Xian nodded. I, Yi Xian, am not an ingrate, nor am I an ungrateful person. The old man smiled and said, This is enough. As he spoke, he stood up. I have nothing to teach you with your current speed and strength. Now I will teach you sword intent and conception. Let's start with sword intent. Come, release your sword intent. Yi Xian nodded, and then he released his sword intent. It didn't take long for his good and evil sword intent to appear. Seeing the good and evil sword intents, the old man frowned. Your sword intents? 2 sword intents? Yi Xian nodded. Well, Amos said softly, that's quite rare. How do you usually use this sword intent? How do I use this sword intent? Yi Xian was stunned. How did I use it in the past? It seemed like I just used sword chi. At this moment the old man suddenly spoke. Sword Dao, sword Dao. Actually, sword intent and intents are extremely important, especially your sword intent. Your sword intent represents your sword Dao, and if you can develop it, its might will be extremely terrifying. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, how do I develop it? Amos said, sword Dao faith. Your sword intent is your sword Dao faith. Yi Xian shook his head, I still don't understand. The old man suddenly put his fingers together, and a sword chi appeared on his fingertip. Yi Xian looked at the old man's sword chi. In the next moment, the sword chi suddenly flew out at an extremely fast speed. He could only see a blurry figure. The speed of this sword was almost the same as his flying sword. Amos said, this is the normal speed of my sword. Look again. As he spoke, he gently pulled his fingers together, and a sword chi appeared on his fingertip. In the next moment he pointed his fingers forward. The sword flew out. The speed of this sword was not much faster than before, but there was an additional indescribable thing. Sword intent. These 2 words suddenly popped up in Yi Xian's mind. He looked at the old man and the latter nodded slightly. Sword intent. With the sword intent, this sword would have a life of its own. Life? Yi Xian frowned slightly. Senior, what do you mean? The old man looked at Yi Xian. Swordsman, we not only cultivate the heart but also the sword. And the sword can understand the human mind, but your current sword is very dead, they do not have their own soul. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, high-level swords, they have sword spirits. Then, the old man interrupted Yi Xian's words, in the hands of a real swordsman, the most powerful sword is no different from an ordinary branch. Moreover, can you really use the power of a high-level sword in your hands? Yi Xian was silent. He currently had the soul-suppressing sword and the divine king sword in his hands. And right now he really could not unleash the true power of the soul-suppressing sword. The old man continued, the strongest thing about a swordsman is that he can give life to the sword, and the most powerful thing about a sword is that it is extraordinary because of the person. As he said that, he waved his right hand and a wooden branch landed in front of Yi Xian. Come, take this wooden branch. Yi Xian picked up the wooden branch. The old man said, in your hands this wooden branch is just a wooden branch. Of course, with your speed and strength this wooden branch can also become very powerful, but it is still a wooden branch. Do you understand what I mean? Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then nodded, I understand. He now truly understood. Sword. Extraordinary because of the person. No matter what sword it was, whether it was strong or not depended entirely on its master. Just like the wooden branch in his hand, if it was in the hands of the plainly dressed woman, then no peerless divine sword could compare to it. But in his hands, it was just a wooden branch. What? Because of the difference in strength? It was actually the difference in the attainment of the sword principle, and this attainment, to put it simply, was the concept of the sword principle. All these years he had focused on the speed and strength of the sword and neglected this point. Sword intent. Yi Xian looked at the wooden branch in his hand and soon his good and evil sword intent appeared on the wooden branch. The old man said again, remember, it doesn't mean that when your sword intent covers the wooden branch, it will have a soul. Sword intent, using intent to nurture the sword is the right way. You can slowly understand the rest. With that he turned around and left. In the field, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, holding the wooden branch in his hand, and the good and evil sword intent covered his surroundings. Enlightenment. What he needed to do now was enlightenment and properly enlightenment. After the old man left, he came to the sky-gazing mountain of the sword sect. This was the tallest mountain in the sword sect and also the core of the sword sect. In front of the Skygazer Palace stood a statue. The statue was of a young man. The young man had a sword hanging from his waist and there was a little fellow sitting on his shoulder. The old man came to the statue, bowed slightly, and walked into the sky-gazing palace behind the statue. As soon as he entered the palace, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared. This person was the sword sect's current sword sect leader, Li Xianfeng. Li Xianfeng glanced at the old man and smiled, Martial uncle, I heard you accepted a disciple. The old man said indifferently, why can't I? Li Xianfeng shook his head, of course not, but martial uncle, if you accept him as a disciple, wouldn't he be in the same generation as us? The old man said coldly, can't I? Li Xianfeng smiled bitterly. The old man sat aside and said, that kid is not bad or I wouldn't have accepted him. Li Xianfeng nodded, someone that can catch martial uncles I must not be bad. The old man looked straight at Li Xianfeng, are you monitoring him? Li Xianfeng was silent. The old man asked, why? Li Xianfeng said in a deep voice, martial uncle, this person is not simple. He comes from the never-ending star sector and has that treasure. The old man frowned, which treasure? Li Xianfeng said, the treasure ranked first on the interstellar bounty list. Hearing this, the old man's frown deepened. Li Xianfeng said softly, that treasure. Rumor has it that it isn't a fourth dimension item. The person who obtains it can use it to enter the fifth dimension. The old man looked at Li Xianfeng, you want that item too? Li Xianfeng was silent. The old man said in a deep voice, you don't even understand the fourth dimension, what are you going to do in the fifth dimension? To die? Li Xianfeng smiled bitterly, martial uncle, this is an opportunity for us. The old man said, what opportunity? Li Xianfeng said softly, our sword sect has been in this Shenwu city for too long. The old man shook his head and sighed, you are the same as your master, too ambitious. But you and your master still remember what the ancestral master said back then? It is precisely because of this that our sword sect does not participate in worldly affairs, that no matter how the all-heaven starfield changes, our sword sect will still exist. Li Xianfeng said, martial uncle, the times are different now. Look at the Star Lord outside. He was only the leader of a small faction back then, but now he is the leader of the all-heaven star sector. Their influence is far beyond our sword sect. The old man said, so what? Do they dare to offend our sword sect? Li Xianfeng shook his head, martial uncle, my master and I hope to make the sword sect famous throughout the all-heaven star sector and revitalize our swordsman sect. The old man shook his head, the sword sect is under your control now. The old man doesn't want to say anything more. But that kid is now my disciple, you and your master better not have any ideas about him. Then he turned around and left. Li Xianfeng suddenly said, martial uncle, some mysterious experts have appeared around the divine martial city. They are all here for him. The old man didn't turn around, you can ignore the sword sect. With that, he disappeared from the palace. Li Xianfeng fell silent for a moment, then walked out of the palace and arrived before the statue in front of the palace. As he looked at the statue, his gaze gradually turned cold. On the summit of the mountain, Yi Xian sat there for 4 hours. For the past 4 hours, his sword intent had been covering the branch in his hand. Sword intent. He had already determined his way of the sword in the past, but he never took another step forward in his way of the sword. Why was the sword extraordinary? Because of its user. Yi Xian looked at the branch in his hand and fell into deep thought. At that moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind, the sword is like a fish. Without water the fish is dead. Hearing that voice, Yi Xian's expression changed greatly. Who is it? In the next moment his expression changed again and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. P.S. You will never know how big the difference is between a picture and the real person. In front of beauty there is no ugly. Chapter 518. The Prison Pagoda. That voice didn't come from outside but from the prison pagoda. The 6th floor. Is the 6th floor awake? Yi Xian's expression darkened. The 5th floor's Di Xing was already so heaven-defying, how strong would the 6th floor be? In an instant Yi Xian thought of many bad outcomes. At this moment the voice spoke again, why are you so nervous? I'm not going to eat you. Yi Xian smiled sheepishly, Senior, you're awake? The voice replied, yes. Yi Xian relaxed, the 6th floor seemed to be quite easy to talk to. The 6th floor spoke again, you can treat the sword as a fish, and yourself as the water. Yi Xian fell silent. At this moment he somewhat understood the 6th floor's meaning. One couldn't just use the sword intent to strengthen the sword, but to fuse the sword intent into the sword. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground, his sword intent appeared in the surroundings again and soon the wooden branch in his hand began to tremble. Using the sword intent to feel the sword, fuse it into the sword. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. About 2 hours later, the wooden branch in Yi Xian's hand suddenly transformed into a sword ray and flew out. The sword ray was silent, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the distance. On the spot, Yi Xian's lips curled up. It's different. This time, his flying sword was completely different from before. As if it had a life of its own. Within the prison pagoda, the sixth floor's voice resounded again. The sword intent is a derivative of the sword, and also your sword Dao, you must make good use of it. Yi Xian nodded, then asked, Senior, how do I improve the speed and strength of my flying sword? The sixth floor was silent for a moment, then said, Your current body can only withstand your current strength and speed. Yi Xian asked, In other words, if I want to improve further, I must improve my body? The sixth floor said, That is one way, but there is another way. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, What is it? The sixth floor said, Use your sword intent. Yi Xian said, Please enlighten me, Senior. What do you use as your flying sword now? Yi Xian said, Qi. The sixth replied, You can condense a sword with your sword will. Yi Xian was stunned and then he opened his palm. In the next moment, a sword appeared in his palm. A sword condensed from sword will. With a slight thought, the sword in Yi Xian's palm flew out. In an instant, the sword appeared 10,000 feet away. Yi Xian was stunned. Quick. This time, his flying sword speed was at least twice as fast as his previous flying sword speed. At this time, the sixth floor spoke again. The sword formed by the sword will is like your arm. Also, the artistic conception is different from Qi. It is colorless and shapeless and its weight is lighter. That is why it can travel through space faster. Of course, if you use it properly, it can be even faster. It could be even faster. Yi Xian opened his palm and an intense sword appeared in his hand once again. In the next period of time, Yi Xian started to cultivate the intense sword like a madman. As the sixth floor had said, he could be even faster. His previous black and white swords were formed from sword intent and Qi. But now he noticed that without Qi the swords were even faster. He'd neglected his sword intent. He'd been neglecting his sword intent all this time. Sword intent. From this moment onward, Yi Xian started to focus on studying his sword intent. Time passed quickly and 10 days had passed in the blink of an eye. At the peak of the mountain, under Yi Xian's control, the two flying swords kept flying across the sky, almost instantaneously. This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. The entire sky was covered in a dense expanse of sword light. Yi Xian opened his palm and two swords fell into his palm. They were the swords condensed from his sword intent. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. His flying swords were even faster than before. Especially with the addition of the spatial Dao law, they were at least 30% faster than before. Don't underestimate this 30%. This 30% was already very terrifying. This 30% meant that when he fought against a creation realm expert in the future, even if he didn't use a sneak attack, he was confident that he could kill the other party in a second. After putting away his swords, Yi Xian scanned his surroundings, feeling a little puzzled. This was because he realized that he didn't know where that old man had gone. And that little martial uncle hadn't appeared either. After a while, Yi Xian shook his head, turned around and walked down the mountain. He had to find Yi Ling. After being here for so long, what he missed the most now was that little girl. He wondered how she was doing. Before long, Yi Xian arrived at Wuyuan. Wuyuan was located on Martial God Mountain, north of Divine Martial City. Martial God Mountain faced the Sword Sect Sky-Gazing Mountain. At the foot of Martial God Mountain stood a statue of a woman. It was a woman. Yi Xian stood quietly in front of the statue. Martial God? He had never seen a martial god before, but he was very curious. What kind of person could be called a martial god? As if thinking of something, he asked, Senior, have you seen a martial god before? He was asking about the sixth story. During this period he realized that the sixth story was quite easy to get along with, at least for now. After a moment of silence, the sixth story said, I've seen a few, but they are all undeserved. They don't deserve this title at all. Yi Xian said with a smile, Senior, the fifth story told me that you're not a four-dimensional being, but a five-dimensional being? The sixth story said, Are you talking about the guy who came here in the form of a soul? Yi Xian nodded. That's him. The sixth story said with a smile, Actually, he's quite powerful. If he hadn't been imprisoned in this tower for so many years, his strength would have been eroded by the Tao principles. Of course, no matter how powerful he is, he's no match for that swordsman. Swordsman. The swordsman in cloud white. He still remembered him. His strength was probably at the same level as the woman in the plain dress. He's really powerful. The sixth story said, As for my background, you won't know even if I tell you. Actually, what you should worry about is not the people imprisoned here but the tower itself. The tower itself? Yi Xian was confused. What do you mean, senior? The sixth story said, the tower recognized you as its master because of that woman. It didn't really recognize you as its master, right? Yi Xian was silent. He remembered the second story said that the tower recognized him as its master because it wanted to suck up to the woman in the plain dress. The sixth story said, it didn't really recognize you as its master. Once it recovers from its injuries, do you think it will still follow you? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, even if it doesn't follow me, it won't kill me. The sixth story said, what if it wants to kill you? Yi Xian said, it won't go that far, right? The sixth story said, this thing is from the fifth dimension. Its previous master was extremely powerful and now you... I don't mean to look down on you, but you're really weak now, so weak that I can't find any words to describe it. Yi Xian's face darkened. Can't this guy be more tactful? The sixth story said again, of course you're not completely useless. At least, I still don't understand why the owner of the two swords at the top of the tower would always help you. Sometimes, a backer is also a kind of strength. Yi Xian's face darkened. If this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Damn it, this guy must be mocking me. Yi Xian decided not to talk to this guy anymore. He walked toward Wu Yuan. Soon he arrived at the stone steps leading to Wu Yuan. At this time a young man blocked his way. The young man glanced at Yi Xian's right shoulder and frowned. You're a swordsman? Yi Xian nodded. The young man said coldly, Swordsman, what are you doing in Win? Yi Xian smiled. Brother, I'm here to look for someone. My sister is in Wu Yuan. Your sister? The young man frowned. What's her name? Yi Xian said, Yi Ling and my friends and Lanxiu and Lian Wanli. Hearing this, the young man was stunned. You're saying that Yi Ling is your sister and Lanxiu and Lian Wanli are your friends? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The young man was furious. You shameless swordsman. In order to chase our Wu Yuan's goddess, you came up with such a shameless excuse. Hurry up and get lost. If you don't blame me for being impolite. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. What the hell? Seeing that Yi Xian didn't move, the young man frowned. Why are you still here? Yi Xian was speechless. Brother? The young man said angrily, who's your brother? Let me tell you, if you don't leave now, when the seniors see you, you won't be able to leave even if you want to. Yi Xian was silent. Had Wu Yuan and Sword Sect become so incompatible? If this happened, he would be embarrassed. Because Yi Ling and the others were all in Wu Yuan. What's the matter? At this moment, a voice came from behind the young man. Yi Xian looked up. It was a woman. The woman was in her 20s. She was tall and wore a floral dress. She was very beautiful, especially her long black hair, which was like a waterfall. Seeing this woman, the young man quickly bowed. Senior sister Fang Shui. The woman named Fang Shui walked in front of the young man. What's the matter? The young man quickly said, a swordsman. He said he's looking for senior sister and the others. Swordsman? Fang Shui frowned. She looked at Yi Xian. You're from Sword Sect? Yi Xian nodded. I'm really looking for someone. I don't have any other intentions. Fang Shui walked in front of Yi Xian. You're looking for Lanxiu? Yi Xian said, yes, please inform them. Fang Shui looked straight at Yi Xian. We don't welcome swordsmen here. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Miss, I really don't have any bad intentions. Yi Ling is my sister. Miss An and Miss Lian are my friends. Please inform them that Yi Xian is looking for them. They will understand. He also wanted to use sound transmission to contact Lian Wanli and the others. However, he found that he couldn't do so at this moment. Apparently, Lian Wanli and the others were in some special environment. Yi Ling is your sister? Ah. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the side. Yi Xian turned to look. It was a man in luxurious robes. The man looked at Yi Xian. He smiled. You said Yi Ling is your sister? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. Please pass on the message. The man in luxurious robes smiled. What proof do you have that she is your sister? Yi Xian frowned. Your Excellency, I am indeed her brother. The man in luxurious robes waved his hand. Who would believe you without proof? I can even say that she is my woman. I even spent the night with her yesterday. Do you believe me? Hearing this, Yi Xian's face instantly turned cold. At the same time, his eyes suddenly opened. In the next moment, a blood-red sword light slashed out from his eyes. Not far away, the man in luxurious robes' head flew off. Blood spurted out like a fountain. At this moment, everyone in the surroundings was stunned. End of this chapter. Chapter 519. Killed. Just like that? Feng Shui and the others stared at the man's corpse in disbelief. At this moment Yi Xian was also a little confused. Did I kill him? But soon this thought disappeared. So what if I killed him? Yiling. He would not allow anyone to insult this name. At this time, the voice from the 6th floor suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. I admire your character. A man lives his life to be free. If something goes wrong, he will draw his sword and kill. This is the true nature of a man. Yi Xian ignored the 6th floor. He looked up at the sky with a calm expression. Yiling. No one could understand the position of his sister in his heart. In the Yi family, he and his sister depended on each other. It was also because of his sister that he had the motivation to live on. Otherwise he would have died a long time ago. Insulting him was fine, but insulting Yi Ling was absolutely not allowed. At this moment, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. In the next moment, the middle-aged man punched at Yi Xian's head. With this punch, the space around Yi Xian directly distorted. It was extremely terrifying. Yi Xian was expressionless. Instead of retreating, he advanced and slashed down with his sword. Boom. As a sword light fell, the middle-aged man in front of Yi Xian was directly blasted dozens of feet away. As soon as the middle-aged man stopped, a flying sword directly pressed against his forehead. This forced him to abruptly stop his attack. He dared not move. If he moved, he would die. At this moment, more and more people gathered around. When they saw that Yi Xian was a swordsman, everyone's eyes became unfriendly. The sword sect swordsman came to Wu Yuan to kill people. This was a naked provocation. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly turned around. As soon as he turned, an afterimage flashed in front of him. Instinctively Yi Xian raised his sword to block. Bang! In the blink of an eye Yi Xian retreated hundreds of feet. At this moment an old man in sackcloth stood in front of him. The old man looked at Yi Xian coldly. Since when did the sword sect's disciples become so arrogant? How dare you kill people in my Wuyan? Yi Xian was expressionless. I'm very sorry about what happened just now, because that wasn't my purpose for coming here. However, if I was given another chance I would still kill him. Without the slightest hesitation. The expressions of Wu Yuan and the others became unsightly when they heard this. Arrogant. This was 2F** King arrogant. The old man's eyes gradually turned cold. Let the old man see what you're made of. How dare you? As the old man spoke, a flying sword suddenly appeared in front of him at the speed of lightning. The old man's expression changed slightly. He dodged to the side and dodged the flying sword. Then he charged at Yi Xian like a bolt of lightning. At this moment Yi Xian, who was not far away, suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Rumble. Along with an explosion, Yi Xian retreated repeatedly while the old man was forced to stop on the spot by Yi Xian's attack. At the same time, 2 flying swords silently appeared in front of and behind the old man. The sudden appearance of these flying swords forced the old man to give up on pursuing Yi Xian. He raised his hands and used his body to resist Yi Xian's flying swords. Bang! Bang! 2 rays of light were blasted apart, but the old man was pushed over 100 m back as well. As soon as he stopped, another 2 flying swords slashed towards him. Bang! Bang! Under the gazes of everyone present, the old man retreated repeatedly in a frenzy. The flying swords were too swift. They were swift to the point the old man couldn't dodge at all. Moreover, the flying swords weren't just swift, they were extremely strong as well. At this moment, there were no less than a few dozen marks on the old man's body. The expressions of everyone here changed when they witnessed this scene. They hadn't expected that the old man would actually be suppressed by Yi Xian. After all, the old man was an academician of Wu Yuan. Even though he was only a professor, he was still an academician. How could he be suppressed by a disciple of the sword sect just like that? It didn't take long for the old man to retreat over 1 kilometer away. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's flying sword stopped moving. Because a middle-aged man who held a ruler was standing not too far away from him. It's Master Lin. Someone exclaimed with shock. Master Lin. He was a martial master who specialized in teaching martial arts in Wu Yuan, and his strength was absolutely not something an ordinary academician could compare to. Master Lin gazed at Yi Xian. He didn't speak and was about to attack. It was pointless to say anything at this moment. Right when Master Lin was about to attack, Yi Xian suddenly chuckled. So it turns out that Wu Yuan doesn't just like to bully the weak, they like to take turns to fight. I've learned something new today. Master Lin stopped when he heard this. Master Lin looked at Yi Xian with an icy cold expression. You came to my Wu Yuan to kill people and cause trouble. What? Do you hope that my Wu Yuan will fight you fairly? Yi Xian opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his hand. He walked towards Master Lin with the sword in his hand. Then let's fight. As soon as he finished speaking, he tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his foot. Yi Xian transformed into a ray of light that shot out explosively, and the space in his path was directly torn apart. In the distance, Master Lin's eyes narrowed slightly, and there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes. In the next moment he raised his ruler and blocked. Bang! The space in front of Master Lin suddenly collapsed, and at this moment 2 flying swords suddenly appeared above and behind Master Lin. Master Lin's expression instantly changed, and his figure flashed to the left by over 100 m. As soon as he stopped, a ray of light suddenly slashed down from above his head. Master Lin's pupils constricted slightly, and he raised his ruler to block it. Bang! As soon as Yi Xian's attack descended, Master Lin was blasted back repeatedly. At the same time 2 rays of light flashed. Bang! Bang! The 2 rays of light collapsed into pieces while Master Lin had moved over 1 kilometer back. Yi Xian was just about to continue attacking when Master Lin suddenly raised his head to look at Yi Xian. In the next moment, Master Lin's figure suddenly vanished on the spot. Yi Xian, who was about to attack, suddenly frowned. Because countless ruler images had suddenly appeared around him, and they formed a dense mass that enveloped him. But it wasn't long before they were slashed into pieces by the 2 rays of light. But it only took a moment for a ruler to arrive in front of him. Yi Xian stabbed forward with his sword. Bang! Yi Xian instantly moved over 100 m back, and the ground beneath his feet instantly cracked apart as soon as he descended to the ground. Master Lin was just about to continue attacking, but the 2 rays of light forcefully stopped him on the spot. Master Lin didn't continue attacking and he just glanced at the surroundings. The battle had caused the surroundings to be in a mess. At this moment, it was pointless for him to continue attacking. Firstly, he wasn't confident in his ability to kill Yi Xian. Secondly, he'd suffered injuries from his sword while Yi Xian was completely unharmed. So, he was in a disadvantaged position right now. Thirdly, if he were to continue attacking and lose, then he wouldn't just lose face for himself, he would lose face for Wu Yuan as well. A martial master of Wu Yuan had actually lost to a disciple of the sword sect. If news of this were to spread, then Wu Yuan's reputation would be ruined. He couldn't lose. When Yi Xian saw that Master Lin wasn't attacking, he didn't attack as well. Because Master Lin wasn't weak, and he had to reveal his trump cards if he wanted to kill Master Lin. Suddenly, a voice resounded from not too far behind Yi Xian. "Brother Yi?" It was a familiar voice. Yi Xian turned around and he was instantly stunned when he saw the person who spoke. The person who came was the war army. The war army ran to Yi Xian and laughed. "You're here too." Yi Xian smiled slightly. "I just arrived." The war army laughed. "It's good that you're here. Are you also here to join Wu Yuan?" Yi Xian shook his head. The war army still wanted to say something. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and said in surprise, "I heard them say that a swordsman came here to kill people. Is it you?" Yi Xian smiled. "It's me." The war army's expression froze. After a while, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Brother Yi, you're here to fight." Yi Xian smiled slightly. "I was originally looking for my sister, Yi Ling. Something happened, so we started fighting." The war army nodded slightly and wanted to say something, but Yi Xian said, "You step aside first. I'll solve this myself." Now that the war army was from Wu Yuan, if he was too close to the war army, it would not be a good thing for the war army. The war army was a little unhappy. "Brother Yi, what are you saying? In the heart of the war army the world is big, but the brothers are the most important." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I know. Let me handle this myself." The war army hesitated, then turned to look at Master Lin not far away. He bowed slightly. "Master Lin, there must be some misunderstanding." Master Lin frowned slightly. "Misunderstanding? He came to my Wu Yuan to kill our Wu Yuan students, and you're telling me there's a misunderstanding?" The war army still wanted to say something, but Master Lin said coldly, "Step back." The war army said in a deep voice, "Master Lin, my brother will never kill people for no reason. There must be some misunderstanding." Master Lin's eyes narrowed slightly. "I told you to step back." The war army still wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly said, "Brother Zhan, let me handle this myself." As he said, he walked to the front of the war army and patted the war army's shoulder gently. "Don't implicate you because of my matter. Otherwise I won't feel at ease." The war army hesitated and then nodded. "Brother Yi, we can talk about it." "Let's talk about it." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Okay, let's talk." As he said, he turned to look at Master Lin not far away. Master Lin sneered, "Talk? Talk about what? If you want to talk about it, sure. You killed my Wuyuan disciple. You must pay for his life first. Hearing this, the war army's face suddenly darkened. He knew that this matter would definitely not be settled peacefully, because he was very clear about Yi Xian's temper. This was definitely a guy who could be persuaded but not cowed. Hearing Master Lin's words, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Master Lin, if I humiliate your loved ones, what will you do? Master Lin's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean? Yi Xian smiled and said, Today I came here to find my sister, but the Wuyuan students won't let me in because I am a disciple of the sword sect. Not only that, your Wuyuan students also humiliated my sister. Speaking of this, his expression gradually became ferocious. Who gave him the guts to humiliate my sister? Is it your Wuyuan? Master Lin said ferociously. So what if it is? Yi Xian smiled and said, Then I killed him. What can you do? What can your Wuyuan do? P.S. 10 minutes late? Tell me, what position do you want? Chapter 520. Lin Shi's expression instantly became extremely ferocious when he heard Yi Xian. Lin Shi was about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Master Lin held the long ruler horizontally in front of him. Bang! The space in front of Lin Shi was instantly shattered, and then a sword slashed down on the ruler. Bang! Lin Shi's ruler shook violently while countless cracks appeared on it. At the same time, countless rays of light enveloped Lin Shi. A moment of silence ensued. Rumble. A figure retreated explosively. It was Lin Shi. Lin Shi had just stopped when a ray of light flashed, and then Lin Shi's expression changed drastically. His figure flashed, but it was still too late. One of Lin Shi's arms flew into the air. Yi Xian intended to attack again, but a furious shout suddenly resounded from the mountain peak. How dare you! As soon as the voice resounded, a powerful aura swept down from the sky. Yi Xian was forced 300 m back by this aura. Moreover, the space around him cracked open as soon as he stopped moving, but it recovered in an instant. Meanwhile, a white-haired old man appeared in front of Yi Xian. Everyone here bowed in unison when they saw the white-haired old man. Vice Dean. The Vice Dean. He was the Vice Dean of Wuyuan, Qin Shan. Qin Shan glanced at Yi Xian with an expressionless face. Do you think this is the sword sect? Yi Xian was about to speak when Qin Shan suddenly pressed his right hand forward. The space around Yi Xian instantly collapsed, but it instantly recovered in the next moment. However, a wisp of blood had appeared on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. Qin Shan was about to attack again when a voice suddenly resounded from behind him. Brother Qin, it's not good to bully the weak. Qin Shan's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he turned around. An old man had suddenly appeared not too far away from him. This person was the old man who taught Yi Xian. Qin Shan looked at the old man coldly. Yu Wuchen, is your sword sect declaring war on my Wuyuan? Yu Wuchen smiled and said, It's just a small matter. Do you have to be so serious? Qin Shan said coldly, Small matter? Your sword sect's disciples came to Wuyuan to kill people, and you say this is a small matter? Yu Wuchen said calmly, Old Qin, why don't you ask him why he killed them? Qin Shan stared straight at Yu Wuchen. No matter what the reason is, he killed someone from my Wuyuan. My Wuyuan will not let him go. Today he must die here. No one can take him away. Yu Wuchen smiled and said, All right. I won't force you if you don't want to talk about it. However, don't you think it's too shameful for a senior like you to bully a junior? Qin Shan sneered, Why? Are you trying to provoke me? Yu Wuchen shook his head. In my opinion, he killed your Wuyuan's disciple. Even if your Wuyuan wants to take revenge, you shouldn't be the one to do it. What do you think? Qin Shan kept quiet. Yu Wuchen said again, Old Qin, even if you killed him, can your Wuyuan regain its face? No, if this spreads out, others will only think that your Wuyuan is useless, that the juniors are useless and only the seniors can do it. Qin Shan sneered, Do you think my Wuyuan doesn't have anyone capable? Then he turned around and looked at an old man not far away. Let her do it. The old man nodded slightly and left. Qin Shan looked at Yu Wuchen coldly. Old lunatic, I know you want to save him, but I'm telling you today my Wuyuan will take his life. Yu Wuchen ignored Qin Shan and walked to Yi Xian. You killed someone? Yi Xian nodded his head. Yu Wuchen asked, Why did you kill him? Yi Xian said honestly, That person insulted my sister. Yu Wuchen frowned. Verbal insult? Yi Xian nodded his head. Yu Wuchen said in a deep voice, You're going to kill someone just because of a verbal insult? Yi Xian looked at Yu Wuchen. I'll kill whoever insulted my sister. Yu Wuchen's expression changed when he heard that. Murderous intent. He could sense a strong murderous intent from Yi Xian's tone. At that moment Yu Wuchen seemed to have understood something. Reverse scale. No matter how weak a person was, they all had their reverse scale, and Yi Xian's reverse scale should be his younger sister. Yu Wuchen sighed softly. Although he had not known Yi Xian for long, he had some understanding of Yi Xian's character. He was definitely not a kind person. Not far away, Qin Shan suddenly laughed coldly. Insulted your sister? He only insulted your sister and you want to kill him? What? Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at Qin Shan. Old man, if you have a problem, come at me. Don't touch my sister. Otherwise, I'll go crazy and kill all the students of Wu Yuan. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Qin Shan was furious. Insolent kid, you want to kill the students of Wu Yuan? At that moment, a woman suddenly appeared in front of Qin Shan. Qin Shan's expression softened slightly when he saw the woman. Shaoan, don't hold back. Kill him. Shaoan turned to look at Yi Xian, and she was instantly stunned when she saw Yi Xian. Shaoan was in Lanxiu. Yi Xian grinned when he saw in Lanxiu. I never expected that we would meet in this way. And Lanxiu turned to look at Qin Shan. Why do you want to kill him? Qin Shan frowned slightly when he heard in Lanxiu. I asked you to kill him. And Lanxiu looked Qin Shan in the eyes. Reason. Qin Shan was about to speak when Lanxiu suddenly shook her head. No reason. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and walked towards Yi Xian. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. Is this a public betrayal? Yu Wuchen was stunned as well. What's going on? Behind Lanxiu, Qin Shan suddenly roared, Stop! Lanxiu stopped and turned around to look at Qin Shan. Qin Shan's expression was terrifyingly gloomy. Do you know what you're doing? Lanxiu said, He's my friend. Friend? Everyone looked at Yi Xian in unison. A friend of the sword sect? Since an unknown period of time, Wu Yuan and the sword sect could be said to be enemies, and it could even be said to be like fire and water. Yet now, a disciple of Wu Yuan had actually said that a disciple of the sword sect was her friend. Qin Shan's expression became extremely unsightly when he heard in Lanxiu, Friend? You must remember that you're a student of Wu Yuan now. Lanxiu's face was expressionless. Then from now onward, I'm not a student of Wu Yuan anymore. An uproar arose in the surroundings when they heard in Lanxiu. Qin Shan was stunned as well. He hadn't expected that Lanxiu would say such a thing. Not a student of Wu Yuan anymore? At this moment, not only was Qin Shan not angry, but he was serious. Because he was very clear about Lanxiu's excellence. It could be said that she was one of the most outstanding students that Wu Yuan had accepted in recent years, especially when Lanxiu had the bloodline of the martial god. This had alarmed all the higher-ups in Wu Yuan. He knew very well what this martial god bloodline meant. Once such a student left Wu Yuan, it would be a huge loss to Wu Yuan. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the side. Shaoan, don't be rash. As the voice faded, a middle-aged man descended from the stone steps. He walked down. When they saw this person, all the disciples of the Wu Yuan Institute hurriedly bowed respectfully. Ding. President. The person in front of him was the dean of Wu Yuan, He Liantian. He was also a rare super expert in the all-heaven starfield. Yu Wuchen frowned when he saw He Liantian. If He Liantian attacked, then he wasn't confident in his ability to take Yi Xian with him. He Liantian walked over to Lanxiu and Yi Xian, glanced at Yi Xian and then looked at Lanxiu. He smiled and said, He's a friend of yours from the never-ending starfield? Lanxiu nodded. He Liantian nodded slightly, and then he gazed at Feng Shui. What happened just now? Feng Shui was slightly hesitant. Heliantendo said, Tell me the truth. Feng Shui nodded slightly and then she glanced at Yi Xian and said, He came to look for his younger sister just now. It didn't take long for Feng Shui to tell them everything that had happened just now. She didn't leave anything out or exaggerate anything. After listening to Feng Shui's words, the entire place suddenly quietened down. In all fairness, it wasn't wrong for Yi Xian to come look for his younger sister. Qin Shan glanced coldly at the young man by Feng Shui's side. It was the young man who'd stopped Yi Xian earlier. The young man's face instantly turned pale when he saw Qin Shan look over. Even though the Wu Yuan Academy and the sword sect were enemies, he would definitely suffer now that the matter had blown up. Meanwhile, He Liantian gazed at Yi Xian and smiled. You said that Yi Ling is your younger sister? Yi Xian nodded. He Liantian's smile became slightly unnatural when he heard this, and then he asked, Is Lian Wanli your friend as well? Yi Xian nodded. That's true. He Liantian and Qin Shan's expressions became slightly unsightly when they heard Yi Xian. It was especially so for Qin Shan. Only now did he realize that the monstrous geniuses that the Wuyuan Academy had recruited recently were related to Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yu Wuchen suddenly smiled and said, "In that case it's a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding." He Liantian nodded slightly. "It's a misunderstanding." Qin Shan spoke in a low voice, "Dean?" He Liantian shook his head slightly. "It's a misunderstanding, a huge misunderstanding." He looked at Yi Xian as he spoke. "What do you think?" Yi Xian said, "I don't care if it's a misunderstanding or not. I only care about my younger sister. It's fine if the Wuyuan doesn't allow me to see my younger sister. I'll just leave with my younger sister." Qin Shan's expression changed when he heard this. Just as he was about to speak, He Liantian smiled and said, "Why wouldn't they allow you to see her? Since you're her brother, it's only right for siblings to meet each other." He paused for a moment before he continued, "How about this? Why don't you come to the Wuyuan Academy? Not only can you reunite with your friend, but you can also be with your younger sister. It's killing two birds with one stone." Upon hearing He Liantian's words, Yu Wuchen's expression changed. He was about to speak when Yi Xian, who was in front of He Liantian, suddenly said, "Join the martial arts institution?" He Liantian nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "I'm a disciple of the sword sect. As long as the sword sect doesn't betray me, I'll be a disciple of the sword sect forever. Therefore, I appreciate Senior's kindness." He was not stupid. If he said that he wanted to join the Wuyuan Academy now, it would be equivalent to offending the entire sword sect. Moreover, if he betrayed the Wuyuan Academy and joined the Wuyuan Academy, the people of the Wuyuan Academy would look down on him. At that time he would really be in a disadvantageous position. If he expressed his loyalty now, the sword sect would definitely protect him to the death. Once he joined the Wuyuan Academy, if the Wuyuan Academy wanted to kill him, he would really have no backing. Hearing Yi Xian Academy's words, He Liantian fell silent. There was a faint smile on his face, but there was a cold glint in the depths of his eyes. Chapter 521. Yu Wuchen instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Yi Xian. If Yi Xian sided with Wuyuan right now, then there was really nothing he could do about it. Of course, if Yi Xian really did that, then it wouldn't be a bad thing for the sword sect. There was no loss if Yi Xian betrayed them now, but if Yi Xian betrayed them in the future, then the sword sect would definitely suffer unbearable losses. He Liantian grinned and said to Yi Xian, "I won't force it." As he spoke, he gazed at Enlancio. "Little An, go back and cultivate." Enlancio fell silent for a short moment before she nodded, "All right." Both He Liantian and Qin Shan heaved a sigh of relief when they heard this. Enlancio's answer represented that she wouldn't leave Wuyuan. Yu Wuchen heaved a sigh of relief as well. He naturally hoped that Enlancio would leave with Yi Xian, but if she did that now, then Wuyuan would definitely stop at nothing to kill both Enlancio and Yi Xian. After all, Wuyuan wouldn't give two peerless geniuses to the sword sect for nothing. Moreover, Wuyuan had a perfectly justifiable reason to kill both Enlancio and Yi Xian. However, Enlancio was willing to stay, so the situation was different. Wuyuan would compromise. It was worth it to compromise for the sake of an extraordinary genius. Enlancio gazed at Yi Xian. "Let's meet again next time. Ling is cultivating and she'll come out in a few days. You can come look for her at that time." Yi Xian thought for a moment before he nodded, "All right." Enlancio nodded lightly and then she turned around and left. Yu Wuchen smiled. "Sect Master Helian, since the misunderstanding has been resolved, then we'll be taking our leave as well." As soon as he finished speaking, he led Yi Xian and vanished on the spot. He Liantian suddenly said, "Disperse." All the students of Wuyuan left when they heard this, and only He Liantian and Qin Shan remained. Qin Shan said solemnly, "Sect Master, then Shaoan?" He Liantian asked softly, "Are you trying to say that she might betray you in the future?" Qin Shan was silent. Helian Tian asked, "How long has it been since she came to Wuyuan?" "Not even half a month had passed. You want her to have a sense of belonging to Wuyuan in such a short time? What are you thinking? Besides, Yi Xian is her friend from the never-ending starfield. If she killed him for Wuyuan's sake, we would have to worry instead." Hearing this, Qin Shan nodded slightly. Indeed. When Wuyuan recruited people, they not only valued talent, but also their character. Nurturing a tiger only to invite calamity was something that no one wanted to happen to themselves. Qin Shan hesitated for a moment before saying, "Shaoan?" He Liantian smiled and said, "The ones who should be worried are the sword sect. Qin Shan was puzzled. What? Helian Tendo said, Yi Xian's sister and friend are in Wuyuan. Don't you think the sword sect should be worried? Then, he looked in the direction of the sword sect in the distance. Get someone to investigate this person. After he finished speaking, he had already disappeared. A moment later, Qin Shan turned around and left. Yu Wuchen brought Yi Xian back to the sword sect. On the mountain peak, Yu Wuchen looked at Yi Xian. Do you know that if it weren't for that girl's intelligence, you wouldn't have been able to come back this time? Yi Xian was silent. Yu Wuchen sighed softly. This Shenwu city is not a simple place. You have to think about the consequences before you do anything next time, understand? Yi Xian nodded. Understood. Yu Wuchen shook his head. Understand my A**s. Then he looked at Yi Xian. Cultivate well during this time. Don't go out. Although Helian Tian and Qin Shan won't do anything to you, the younger generation of Wuyuan won't let this go. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Why do Wuyuan and sword sect hate each other so much? Yu Wuchen pointed to the distance. Shenwu city only has this much territory. In this city there are only two forces, our sword sect and Wuyuan. Tell me, do you think they like it? Yi Xian said, I saw two statues outside the city. Yu Wuchen said softly, in the beginning Wuyuan and our sword sect lived in harmony. But you know, time can change many things. Yi Xian shook his head. He didn't expect things to turn out like this after he came to Shenwu city. In the future, when the sword sect and Wuyuan fight, it's not impossible. Thinking of this, he felt a headache. At this time, Yu Wuchen said, If there's nothing important, don't go out of Shenwu city. Then he turned and left. On the spot, Yi Xian frowned. After a while, he knew that the sword sect must have investigated his background. And this Yu Wuchen didn't allow him to leave Shenwu city. Obviously, those who wanted his treasure were outside the city. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned and left. The monarch hound suddenly asked, Kid, where are you going? To kill people. From Qing City until now, he himself was feeling slightly aggrieved because there were too many people who wanted this treasure of his. But now he didn't want to passively wait for them to attack. He wanted to take the initiative. Especially now, with Shenwu city as his support, he could run if he couldn't win. Soon Yi Xian left Shenwu city. Of course, he didn't leave the city in broad daylight. With the Chaos Chi concealment, it was difficult for ordinary people to notice him. Somewhere, an old man looked at Shenwu city from afar with a gloomy face. Behind the old man there was a red shadow. The old man said in a deep voice, This sword sect is not ordinary. With Yi Xian's talent, if he joins the sword sect, soon we old guys won't be his match. The red shadow nodded. With his current strength he can easily kill Manifestation Realm experts. If this continues, I'm afraid even Dao Realm experts won't be able to do anything to him. The old man looked at the red shadow. What's the sword sect's attitude? The red shadow said in a deep voice, Right now the sword sect's attitude is unclear. The old man asked again, What about the Star Lord? The red shadow said in a deep voice, There's no movement either. But I don't think he will let this go. In the battle at Never-Ending Starfield, he suffered heavy losses. Not only him but all the starfields that participated in the battle also suffered heavy losses. The old man said in a deep voice, Then who is the person behind Yi Xian? The red shadow said, The person behind Yi Xian is also a mystery. The old man looked at Shenwu city. Do you know why Shenwu city is a special place? The red shadow said, Wuyuan and the sword sect are powerful. The old man said softly, That's part of the reason. But there's another reason. There's a dragon vein in Shenwu city, a divine grade dragon vein. Dragon vein. The red shadow's expression changed slightly. In this world, spirit chi was the foundation of all living things. And some places, because of the nourishment of heaven and earth, would have spirit veins. Places with spirit veins would usually be occupied by powerful forces. Especially places with good spirit veins, they would be used as grotto heavens. And above spirit veins were dragon veins. The spirit chi gathered in dragon veins was extremely terrifying, especially when the dragon vein in Shenwu city was a divine grade dragon vein, the highest level of dragon vein. The old man said, Although there's a dragon vein in Shenwu city, no one has ever dared to covet it. Do you know why? The red shadow said, The Wuyuan and the sword sect of Shenwu city are very powerful. The old man nodded. Very powerful, so powerful that it's unfathomable. Even the Star Lord wouldn't dare to covet the dragon vein. But it's different now. The red shadow asked, Yi Xian? The old man nodded slightly. The dragon's vein is not a must, but the treasure on Yi Xian is something that many people can't get their hands on. For example, Master. He was determined to get his hands on this treasure. Apart from Master, some old monsters have come out of seclusion. The Red Shadow said, but Shenwu City, the old man said with a smile. In the past, no one wanted to provoke Shenwu City, but now they don't care about that. Especially with the divine Grey Dragon vein in Shenwu City, it's very tempting. The Red Shadow asked, what's Master's plan? The old man chuckled. Wait and see. Someone will be more anxious than us. The Red Shadow said, the Star Lord? The old man nodded. In half a month at most, the Star Lord will make a move. The Red Shadow said, this Shenwu City is not simple. It's indeed not simple. The old man looked at the two statues in front of the Shenwu City. Rumor has it that the Wuyuan Ancestral Master and the Sword Sect Ancestral Master are in Shenwu City. This should be their biggest support. Saying this, he shook his head and smiled. If the Sword Sect doesn't give up on Yi Xian, not to mention an Ancestral Master, even if their Ancestral Master is reborn, it's useless. The Red Shadow was about to speak, but at this moment, his face changed dramatically. In a flash, his figure flashed and he retreated. But the old man in front of him reacted faster than him. The moment the Red Shadow retreated, he slammed his palm forward. Rumble. As the palm fell, the space in front of him collapsed. However, he was still a bit slow, and a sword ray penetrated his forehead first. The old man's body stiffened. He wanted to abandon his body, but he found that his soul couldn't escape from his body at all. Behind the old man was Yi Xian with the soul-suppressing sword. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura was extremely powerful because there was a dragon soul in his body. Facing this old man, Yi Xian directly used the dragon soul because if he didn't use the dragon soul, he wasn't confident that he could kill the old man in one strike. After seeing Yi Xian kill the old man in an instant, the Red Shadow not far away didn't hesitate. He turned around and ran at an extremely fast speed, disappearing into the end of the starry sky in the blink of an eye. Yi Xian still didn't chase after him. Instead, he withdrew the dragon soul and walked in front of the old man. The old man wasn't completely dead yet. He stared at Yi Xian and said, "You've actually become so strong." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Surprised? Surprised?" The old man sneered, "Yi Xian, do you know what your biggest weakness is?" Yi Xian's smile gradually turned cold. "What do you mean?" The old man's smile widened. "Our information shows that your biggest weakness is your sister. If I'm not wrong, they should have already started that plan, huh?" At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly held the long sword in his hand and pointed it at the old man's forehead. "Don't even think about touching my sister, otherwise I'll definitely let you know what it means to beg for death." As his voice fell, he stabbed the sword bit by bit. Blood splattered. P.S. Asking for votes. Some readers said, "I'm getting more and more shameless." Chapter 522. Just like that, Yi Xian's sword pierced bit by bit into the old man's forehead. His soul-suppressing sword was madly devouring the old man's soul. The old man laughed madly. "Yi Xian, the more you care about your sister, the more miserable her fate will be." "Ah!" Yi Xian suddenly slashed with his sword. Psst. The old man's head flew into the air. Yi Xian's expression was terrifyingly gloomy. Meanwhile, the Emperor Hound said solemnly, "They want to attack the people around you." Yi Xian silently held the soul-suppressing sword. The Emperor Hound said, "Don't be anxious. Although their target is your sister, she is in Wuyuan now. They have no chance to attack." Yi Xian shook his head. "They will definitely attack." He knew that those people would definitely stop at nothing to obtain the prison pagoda. It would be difficult for them to attack him, so they would definitely attack his friends, especially his sister. Yi Xian said solemnly, "Brother Emperor Hound, I need your help." The Emperor Hound said, "Should I go protect her in secret?" Yi Xian nodded, "I will feel more at ease with you there." The Emperor Hound said, "All right. However, you have to be careful. They will definitely keep a close eye on you." Yi Xian said, "Don't worry. If I can't beat them, I will run." The Emperor Hound smiled, "I'm just afraid that you will be brainless and fight them head-on. Be careful." With that, the Emperor Hound left the prison pagoda and vanished. In the field, Yi Xian took a deep breath. Kill. He wanted to kill now. Yi Xian quickly vanished. On the other side, the red figure that fled stopped. He was far away from Divine Martial City. Terrifying. The previous scene was truly a frightening one for him. The old man was stronger than him, but he was instantly killed by Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian had launched a sneak attack, it was still extremely terrifying. This Yi Xian's strength was a little too strong. And Yi Xian would only become stronger if he continued to be like this. If this kind of person wasn't killed, there would be endless troubles in the future. The red shadow remained silent for a moment before he turned around and left. He no longer dared to keep an eye on Yi Xian. Yi Xian returned to the divine martial city. He went to Wuyuan again, but this time he didn't go in. Not long after, the war army walked out of Wuyuan. This time, in addition to the war army, there was another group of people. A familiar person. Mo Yunqi, Jiang Jiao and the others. Seeing these people, Yi Xian was stunned. At this time, Mo Yun ran up to Yi Xian and gave Yi Xian a big hug. "Bandit Yi, are you surprised to see me?" Ah. Yi Xian was speechless. At this time, Jiang Jiao and Bai Zhe walked up to Yi Xian. Jiang Jiao sized up Yi Xian. "Where's my saber?" "Saber?" Yi Xian was stunned. Then he hurriedly took out a saber. A golden saber. This was a gift from Jiang Jiao. Naturally, he had been keeping it well. Seeing this golden saber, Jiang Jiao's expression softened. She glanced at Yi Xian. "Aren't you happy to see me?" Yi Xian hugged Jiang Jiao and laughed. "I'm happy. Very happy." Ah. Jiang Jiao was speechless. Not far away, Mo Yunqi curled his lips. Prioritizing a lover over a friend. Beside Mo Yunqi, Bai Zhe said calmly, "You should know your place." Mo Yunqi said angrily, "What do you mean?" Bai Zhe was expressionless. "I said you're stupid." Mo Yunqi was speechless. Jianji glanced at Yi Xian and Jiang Jiao. He didn't say anything. After a while, Yi Xian and the others found a restaurant in the city. They sat around the table. This chapter is not finished. Please continue. Mo Yunqi looked at the dishes on the table and shook his head. This is far from Bandit Ye's cooking. Hearing Mo Yunqi's words, Bai Zhe and Jiang Jiao both looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian. At this moment, they recalled their days at Azure Region's Azure Billow Academy. Yi Xian asked softly, "How is Azure Billow Academy now?" Mo Yunqi said, "It's developing very well. It's already the top academy in Azure Firmament World. Moreover, we have a good relationship with Azure Sword Sect. Now, everyone in Azure Firmament World is proud to join our Azure Billow Academy." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "That's good." Mo Yunqi suddenly smiled. "Bandit Yi, you're too fast. We almost couldn't catch up to you. If it wasn't for those violet sources that you sent to me, we probably wouldn't be able to see each other for the rest of our lives." Yi Xian said, "Your natural endowments aren't bad. So long as you have sufficient resources, you won't be inferior to anyone." Mo Yunqi chuckled. "I think so too." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. This fellow is still so sly. Meanwhile, Jiang Jiao suddenly said, "Do you have any plans?" "Plans?" Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, "I don't have any plans. What I have to do now is become stronger." "Become stronger?" Mo Yunqi nodded slightly. "We understand." After coming from Azure City, they'd realized that without strength, everything was fleeting. In this world, the strong were respected and the strong survived. It was just that cruel. Yi Xian said, "Have all of you joined Wuyuan?" Mo Yunqi nodded. "Wuyuan is more suitable for us. You know that we don't know anything about swords." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "Don't leave Shenwu City during this period of time. Some fellows are spying on me in the dark. I'm afraid they'll have designs on you." Mo Yunqi and the others glanced at each other. In the end, Jiang Jiao said in a low voice, "Don't worry. We won't leave Wuyuan easily." Yi Xian nodded and then he looked at the war army. "Brother Zhan, do me a favor. Help me find out if there are any experts in this starfield that can be invited with money." The war army was stunned and then he said, "You're looking for someone?" Yi Xian nodded. This time he wasn't going to do it alone. What he lacked the least now was violet sources. Find helpers. The more helpers the better. The war army thought about it and then he said, "Leave this to me. As long as there's money, I believe that many experts will be willing to help." Yi Xian nodded. "If possible, help me look at the surrounding starfields and see if there are any rogue cultivator experts in the surrounding starfields." The war army got up. "I'll contact them now." Speaking of this, he hesitated and then he asked, "Then what level of expert should I invite?" Yi Xian said, "At least creation realm." The war army said in a low voice, "An expert of this level may need a lot of violet sources." Yi Xian smiled. "This doesn't matter. I'm not short of money." Along the way he killed countless experts. The souls of those experts were basically devoured by Little Soul, but he kept all their things. Moreover, he had already contacted the divine race and asked them to send him some immortal artifacts. The divine race had hundreds of immortal artifacts. These immortal artifacts were still very valuable in the eyes of Creation Realm experts. After all, not everyone had Creation Realm treasures. 2 hours later, Jiang Jiao and the others returned to Wuyuan. For them now, Wuyuan was the safest place. Wuyuan in a small courtyard. Jiang Jiao and the others sat around the table. Mo Yunqi said in a low voice, "Among the 4 of us, the 9th princess is the strongest. She is already Origin Realm, the closest to Saint Realm, but," speaking of this he shook his head and smiled. "Bandit Ye's enemy is too strong. I'm afraid that the few of us will still be a burden to him." Bai Zhe nodded. "A burden?" Jiang Jiao was silent and his face was a little gloomy. At this moment, Jianji suddenly said softly, "This chapter is not over, please turn the page." "You shouldn't think that way." Everyone looked at Jianji. Jianji said, "As a friend, help if you can. If you can't, just try your best. What we can do now is to cultivate well. Don't think too much about other things." Jiang Jiao got up. "Let's cultivate." After that he and Jianji turned and left. Mo Yunqi looked at Bai Zhe. "Actually, I really want to beat him up." Bai Zhe nodded slightly. "I wanted to. The problem is I can't beat him. So, I can only beat you." Mo Yunqi was instantly furious. After Yi Xian returned to the sword sect, he went straight to Yu Wuchen. "You want swords?" Yu Wuchen looked at Yi Xian in front of him curiously. Yi Xian nodded. "I want a lot of swords." Yu Wuchen was silent. Yi Xian asked, "What's wrong?" Yu Wuchen said in a low voice, "If you only want one, I can get you an immortal artifact sword. But if you want a lot," Yi Xian thought for a while and said, "I can buy it." Yu Wuchen shook his head. "These swords the sword sect will not sell. Because if these swords are in the hands of the sword sect's disciples, their power is boundless. Therefore the sect values these swords very much." Yi Xian nodded slightly. "I understand." At this moment Yu Wuchen waved his right hand. A sword suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The sword was 5 feet long. It was a third longer than a normal sword. Moreover, the sword was extremely thin like a cicada's wing. Apart from that, this sword had no hilt. Yi Xian looked at Yu Wuchen. "Senior?" Yu Wuchen said. "This is my sword. It's called Desolate Spirit. It's also a flying sword. It's made of a special material. It's as light as a feather. It's very suitable for you." Yi Xian shook his head. "Senior, this is your sword." Yu Wuchen shook his head and smiled. "I'm not skilled in flying swords. I can't bring out its true might in my hands. Don't be wishy-washy and keep it." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he kept the Desolate Spirit. Just as Yu Wuchen had said, he felt as if he was holding air when he held this sword. "It's too light." Even though this sword wasn't at the Fortune Realm, it was absolutely a top-rate existence amongst immortal artifacts. Yu Wuchen glanced at Yi Xian. "Remember, don't leave the city." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Yi Xian kept the Desolate Spirit sword, and then he sat down cross-legged on the ground. For some unknown reason, he felt slightly agitated as if something bad was about to happen. Meanwhile, the voice from the 6th floor suddenly resounded in Yi Xian's mind. "If you give up on your younger sister, then your sword will become unimaginably strong. The stronger your obsession with your younger sister, the stronger your sword will be." Yi Xian shook his head. "My younger sister is everything to me. For her, I can give up everything including the sword. Of course, my younger sister doesn't conflict with the sword." The voice from the 6th floor said, "But if you give up on her and focus on the sword, then you will become even stronger." Yi Xian said softly, "By then I will lose the meaning of cultivating the sword. This is obsession." "Oh, obsession it is then." "Obsession. That's the devil." "So be it." "You're willing to become a devil? What's the difference between a devil and a god?" "In the eyes of the world, devils are bad and gods are good. In my opinion, the so-called devils aren't necessarily bad, and the so-called gods aren't necessarily good." "You're right. Then, are you interested in becoming a devil? Are devils strong?" "They're all right." Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, then asked, "Senior, are you a devil?" The voice from the 6th floor said, "They all call me the Great Devil. Actually, I think I'm a good person." Yi Xian asked, "Then why were you locked up?" The voice from the 6th floor said, "This stupid tower of yours only looks at the strong and the weak, not the good and the bad." Yi Xian, end of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.